Welcome to People Talking Sitting Down.
I'm sitting here and like the school year's about to end. What do I kind of want to do with my life, right? Like, I'm like, what would I want to do with my life? Like, what could I do that would interest me? So then I'm like, what if I started a podcast? Fine, like that's what I'll do.
These people get hundreds of messages a day, and you seem to keep getting through.
With regards to like the people that I've had on though, it's just me reaching out by contact information. They're sometimes down, sometimes not, but when they are, it's always super duper cool. Let's start off with the conversation I was going to start off with before that we're talking about. I almost got in the car and I almost got into a car accident when I was driving here. Not me, but my dad. So my family's driving here because we're like 2 hours away from Pennsylvania. Forget the highway we're on. I'm listening to music on my earbuds. Or I might have even been listening to your show. But I wasn't paying attention. And next thing I know, my dad and my mom are like in this panic. And I hear it through my earbuds, and she's like, brake. And my dad's like honking the horn, and I just see some guy, like this car that basically slowed down and was like kind of like rocking back and forth with like swerving. And then I asked my mom later, I'm like, what happened? And apparently some guy cut in to the front. Like he just swerved in and like started slowing down at the same time. And he had his hazards on. So what was going on? I don't know. But either way, my dad and mom were obviously very panicked and they had to slow down, like punch on the brakes because he was going 70, 80 on the highway and almost hit the car. But luckily I'm here now.
Yeah. I'm glad you made it safely.
Yeah.
The random question. What kind of car are they driving?
I don't know.
Is it new? Because I only asked this. I was borrowing my brother's truck, and it's like a newer truck. It's a Ford Maverick, and it has like automatic crash detectors.
Right.
So like when somebody will cut in front of you, it'll like automatically brake.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that was happening, and I was just like, I was driving. I was like, this is the craziest little machine.
Right.
Like it's driving. It's like a half. Not that it's an autopilot or anything like that.
Right.
But just the fact that it's aware now, and then they also had like the brights were automatic, and that threw me off too. I had no idea what it was. I was like, wait, this is working on its own.
Yeah, it feels like magic. Yeah. No, that's funny.
I just can't wait till cars actually drive themselves. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I want that though. I kind of like the idea that I can drive my own car, in a way, or like have people drive me. But then again, if cars can drive me, and also too, like if cars can drive me, they're going to follow the rules 100% of the time. So it's kind of going to remove that aspect of like, your friend goes a little bit faster for like a second or something.
Yeah.
So that would kind of suck.
Because how you're 17 years old, right?
Yeah.
So, again, we're going to get into everything that you do, but it's beyond impressive.
Thank you.
But I was so excited to ask all these questions of like, I don't know, like what's like being 17 like? Because I'm 10 years older than you, 11 years older than you, so it's not that much different. But when I was going through high school, like there wasn't as much worry in the world, it felt like.
Yeah.
And today it's like, I just wonder, do you feel like you're experiencing that? Is it like pushed on you?
In what sense? Because and the reason I say that is because you are right. There is a lot of worry in the world. And I think about this all the time. It's the fact that, like politics, for example, a lot going on in politics. I mentioned this before on my show where it's like that we have a war now in Israel and Palestine. Iran launches a missile. Ukraine versus Russia, which the United States is also somewhat involved with. But like in terms of that, I know what you're talking about. Like, and I've thought about this where it's like, do I care? Like, should I care? What's my position in it? And the honest truth is I don't think I should care, right? In a weird way, because I don't think like there's nothing I can do, right? Like I'm not going to be able to say something to Zelensky or Biden, or at least, generally the general public, no matter what they really think, doesn't change too much, unfortunately. Right. I mean, I always do believe that you can do anything and that you can make change. But with something like that, when it's like two world leaders fighting, there's really nothing like the general public should be worrying about because unfortunately they can't really do much. Right. Like I don't like that idea of having unnecessary worry.
Yeah.
But with your question though, just detail a little bit more.
No, I mean, it's interesting. Just, and I actually agree with your take. I agree with your take. It's like, what can you do and how much can you worry about it? Because I went through a phase 6 months ago when all the, bombs were being dropped, and I was having these crazy dreams. I was waking up like exhausted because I was like in World War III in my head, like in my dream world. Like it was nuts. But at the same time, it's like I worried about it so much, but all that did was debilitate my ability to do what I want to do. You know what I mean? Like it didn't allow me to, like you're saying, like, hopefully at some point when I'm 50 years old, I can like have a voice and speak up a little bit more and like make change and stuff like that. But now's not that time. As far as like things being pushed in high school these days, like it's just, it's interesting to me that you guys are growing up in a world where Twitter, X, whatever is a thing, like Instagram, like everything's so in your face. Like when I was in high school, Vine came out.
Right. Yes. I know Vine.
Yeah. So it's like, that was a completely different, and Twitter just started. It was like, honestly, Twitter at that point was like chaos. Like people, you have high school kids out there saying stuff that like 10 years later like needs to be deleted for,
for whatever reason.
Yeah. Cause they're being high school kids.
I know what you're talking about. I mean, that could go so many ways though. Cause like Twitter, for example, I try not to go on it unless if I have to. Like for example, with Jack Rysider, that's not how I reached out to him, but like I looked through his tweets before I did that interview. But I try my best not to go on Twitter because everything on Twitter is either adult material or it's kids in a school fighting, or it's, some guy in a car crash and, another guy comes in and beats him up. And I'm like, do I really want that on my head constantly? Probably not. It's probably not good for me. It's probably also not good for my soul or my anything, right? Because like just seeing people fight and like, I even just saw a video today where it's like substitute teacher, knocks kid out for calling him the N-word. And like, do I really need that?
And there's honestly, I've actually seen a lot of these videos and I didn't realize it. There's a lot of them that are acting, that they're like the accounts are skit accounts. And they look very real because they're filmed from like, down here. It looks
from a low quality camera.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like it looks like it's real.
Yeah. And you look in the comments and it's like craziness because people are fighting back and forth. And it's like, no, this was like just a depiction of like what could happen. It's like, well, all right, if we keep pumping that out, what's going to happen? It's like, it's crazy. I actually had a dream. I don't know, maybe like a month ago. And I've been keeping a dream book. So it's like, I write down whatever happens in my dreams. And at the end of my dream, like my phone had this like brown gob, like this poison, and it was like prickers, and it was coming out of my phone. Yeah. And I just woke up and like I tried to like meditate on it. Like your phone can be poison. Yeah. It can literally like infect your mind. And it's not, it's not good. So it's like I am interested, whether do you think kids should be able to have like under 18 access to these kinds of sites, social media? Well, interconnectedness.
This is something I've thought slightly about, but I don't think I've thought enough about it. But for me, and I remember my freshman year, there was a teacher that actually did a study, like a survey really, of when you got your phone and when you first got social media. And almost everybody gave the same answer, that they got their phone when they were in 5th grade, right? And then everybody got social media somewhere around the end of middle school, maybe beginning of high school, including myself. So, when it comes down to the question of like, should you? Well, I mean, number one, nobody wants to be the kid with a flip phone when everybody else has an iPhone, right? And number two, it kind of teaches you how to communicate, and, it exposes you to the world, right? Like it does teach you how to talk to people, and it exposes you to all this knowledge in the world, right? And what's going on, and it keeps you updated. But on the other perspective, I think, you have to be very careful with that, where like, would I give my son an iPhone, I guess is really the question. Probably not until I think he's right, until he's like 12, 13, when I think he at least has the ability to understand like what to do and what not to do, right? Because if I give it to him when he's 10, like, I mean, again, I don't blame my parents. And again, it also depends on if what he's doing is requiring a phone. Yeah. Like if he goes to sports every day or he's walking home in the middle of wherever, I probably want him to have a phone.
Yeah.
Right. Or an Apple Watch or some type of communication. But I think as a parent, I would just have to be very careful about that. And I would definitely, I don't know if I would want my son on the internet.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's a dangerous place. And it's like, I always laugh. It's like, you know, Twitter, Instagram, they'll put on those filters where it's like, same thing with like Reddit, where it's like either like adult content, or like, you know, are you sure you want to click? It's like like a 14-year-old's going to hit yes. Like what? Like,
no, I'm not 18.
Like, sorry, next. Like, and then it's like, oh, like somebody's getting hit by a car. Like I have some friends that, and this is an algorithm thing that luckily I don't participate in.
Yeah.
And I don't see any of the videos because I scroll past them so quickly, but like people getting hit by cars and like, like, I mean, Joe Rogan talks about this all the time, like the most fucked up stuff of like, again, stuff in the war. And it's like, there's truth to it. It's like, that is real.
Yeah.
That stuff is happening, but I want to stay as close to this like human world, this physical world as possible. And it's like in a real physical world, like you don't see that 100 times. Like you shouldn't see it unless you're in war, which is like a whole other thing, but like 10,000 people die over the course of your, like if you're, you know, seeing 2 of those videos a day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's just take, you know, the war in Ukraine and Russia, right? For example, the general question I would ask is like, does this affect me and can I really change this? No. And if you can't, don't worry about it, right? Like it shouldn't cloud your mind because unless if you have family there, I really wouldn't worry about it. I talk about it because of the people that I have on where I'm like, what do you think of this? So I guess in a way that's probably not helping it because it does add to the fact that people are talking and thinking about it. And it is important. I do think people should be aware and should follow like what their government is doing. But I think to such an extreme that's just constant, this guy is doing X thing. It's like, well, yeah, but things happen all the time, right? And it doesn't affect me. It's like,
And the truth is like they, and I don't know enough about the situation to talk about it at a high level, but like the Uyghurs in China stuff, you know, it's like there's essentially like could be like mass genocide right now in China that has been going on, and like all these things in Syria, and it's like there's been so much stuff going on that it's just not on our, it's not shown to us,
right?
So it's like this stuff, like yes, there's bombs being dropped, but there's been bombs being dropped forever, and it just as of, you know, whatever, say 5 years ago, well, we were talking about COVID, so it wasn't like. Same thing was happening. People were still dying. People were still like, losing their children, their family members, things like that. It just wasn't being talked about.
Well, I had on, and it's interesting you're saying this, but I had on Sarah Adams, who was on the Sean Ryan show, and she was the head of the Benghazi investigation, 13 hours. So, and she ran this whole trial with like Mike Pompeo as like witness, and like she called in Hillary Clinton to the stand. Like it was a big case. And with her, I asked her, I'm like, what was the ultimatum with like everything that happened, but mainly in Afghanistan? And I asked her, I don't know if I asked her about the Taliban or not Taliban, Al-Qaeda. And she said, she's like, if you asked me about a year or two ago, I would have said that Al-Qaeda is the smallest it ever was. But now I'm probably thinking it's the biggest it ever was. And that's a lot. I mean, she worked for the CIA as a targeting officer and an analyst. She has had contact with like every type of terrorist organization and like insider, as you can imagine. So it means a lot coming from her to say that, that Al-Qaeda is as big as it ever was. But my point with that is I asked her, I'm like, well, then why is it not being covered anymore? Like if it's as big as it ever was, why is the US not involved? And her honest answer was because we got tired of it, right? Because the media stopped caring and because the government also stopped caring. And I'm like, huh. And it's just, that was an interesting response that she gave me, that basically we don't do anything in Afghanistan anymore or, any of these other Middle East countries because we don't care. We're not incentivized to.
Well, that's the thing we were talking earlier about energy systems. It's like, well, if the people stop putting their energy towards caring about that, and that's where it probably starts, is like at the lower levels. It's like, okay, if they start noticing, okay, we keep covering these segments and they're 25% less viewership because people are just, same thing like COVID. Like eventually you just get tired of it. It's like you get hit over the head 100 times with the same thing. It's like, all right, like now nobody cares. Like now it's like you've worn us out.
It is what it is.
So there has to be the next thing. And I actually, again, I think 6 months ago I was struggling with a lot of these topics, a lot of the world stuff. It's like something hit me maybe a month ago where it's like I just don't care anymore.
Right.
Like I just don't. It is what it is. The world's set up in the way it is. It's fucked up sometimes. I don't understand it. I'm gonna work my entire life to try to understand it better. But this is the best way that I can learn.
Yeah.
Is talking to people, hearing their experiences, hearing again like these conversations you're having, which I want to touch on that now because we might not do like a direct intro, but pretty much like why you're here. That you host a podcast. You're 17 years old. You have some of the biggest guests like that have been on some of the biggest podcasts, and it's insanely impressive. You've had Julian Dory, who has an amazing podcast. He's been on here. Jim Diorio, who's on here. Matt Cox, who's been on Lex Friedman. James Rhysider, is it?
Yeah, Jack Rhysider.
Jack, that's right. From Darknet Diaries. I mean, it's wild. Like I don't know, how you're able to do it, but after watching a couple of your videos and then with Julian, I was just like, you ask direct questions, you're not afraid, and you just do it, and it's wildly impressive because I know how hard it is, and at 17 years old, I'm like, well, I never could have done that. So, What was the first thing that got you? Like, what was the start?
What was the start? Well, I was thinking about this on the right here too. I've never gone to like every single reason. So this is probably the first time I've gotten like the beginning of it, which is freshman year of high school. I'm like, I don't do any sports, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like super overweight. I think like 180, 185, right? And I was also shorter too. So that added to it. But like, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. And I never... With me, my interests have always been a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and like everywhere. And like sometimes I would just start to get interested in something, and then something would happen. So like, COVID, for example, I got really into mixed martial arts when I was younger in middle school. And that was cool. And I got a belt, like I think it was the first orange belt or whatever. And I did it once, and I'm like, oh man, and like in 3 years or whatever, I think it was like 6th grade. By the time I'm like a freshman in high school, I could be a black belt. And I was thinking about that because, I've done soccer and stuff too, but everything like I just kind of would quit. I would kind of lose interest, or I never really had interest to begin with. So when I did this, all of a sudden then COVID happens, and now it's unsafe to like be around people, let alone grapple with them on the floor. So, as you can imagine, that becomes a problematic scenario, especially. And so eventually the place even shut down. The guy who ran it, super cool guy, his name is Phil. But yeah, now he's like running something else somewhere else. He's still doing mixed martial arts, but regardless of that though, it's like freshman year, like I have kind of nothing. Like, I go home, I sleep, or I play Xbox.
Yeah.
And I'm in all advanced classes. Right. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, well, I'm just, like stressed with school all the time. So it's like, I don't want to go work out. My friends would encourage me to work out, and I'd be like, I can't, which was kind of a lie because I could, but then I keep on going. And then eventually, I'm sitting here and like the school year's about to end, I think it was. And then my grandpa and my dog, who I rescued, who I had for like 2 years, like we found her in Texas underneath a bus. Like we rescued her, and both of them passed away within like the same week.
Oh, wow.
So then I'm like, and there were some other things too, but generally those two things. And then I'm like, what do I kind of want to do with my life? Right. Like, I'm like, where? And for month, I'm kind of like thinking. And I thought, I'm like, well, like, what would I want to do with my life? Like, what could I do that would interest me? So then I'm like, what if I started a podcast? And I think more about it, and I'm like, fine, like that's what I'll do. And I had every plan in the world. Like the podcast was going to look very, very different too. Like I was originally going to have on kind of what you do, but like kind of mix it with like soft white underbelly. Soft white underbelly, right?
Yeah. Julian mentioned that to me, right. And I haven't gotten around to watching one of his videos. Yeah. I've seen a couple, and it's just even the way that it's shot, I can tell. Like, it looks beautiful, and it's like getting. Yeah. I think I've probably seen like one.
Well, he interviews homeless people and like different people now too. He branches out, but my plan was to interview like homeless people and like charity workers and like self-improvement people. And that was going to be like the big three. And that was going to be the whole point. It was supposed to be like everyday people, kind of almost like what you do. Right. But then I thought more about it, and well, it's not that I thought more about it. It's that then I emailed, and I've told the story a million times, where I'm like, who would I want to bring on? And then I look up, I remembered like this guy off the top of my head, Improvement Pill on YouTube, right? And he's not like a no name, but he has like now he's like 3.4 million. When I had him on, he had like 2.7 million. He had like something crazy still. Regardless, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to him. He's probably not going to respond, but that would be a cool interview. 5 minutes goes by and I get a response back from him, and he goes, all right, sure. Email me in a week. I'm in Asia right now. And I do exactly that. The same, like 1 week exactly. And I'm like, wait, like it was kind of a really surreal moment because I've been watching this guy for years too. And he has millions and millions of views. And he's, like some of his most viewed videos are like 8 million views. Like it's crazy. And this is before shorts, by the way.
So when you just to like when you reach out, do you say like, hey, my name's George, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and I'm like, do you specify your age?
No, because I don't like to use that as like a oh, I'm 17, you should do this for me, because I feel like that's a way of like, for me, when people tell me to do that, I feel like it's a way of just like asking for help. Like, oh, I'm 17, I need the help, and I don't like doing that to people. For you. I appreciate that, but
because I'm like, how are you getting through? Is the mind blowing thing, because these people get hundreds of messages a day.
Well,
you seem to keep getting through.
Well, I'm always just super honest, and I thought about this too, where it's like, I just tell the truth. I'm just super honest about like, hey, I want to bring you on my show. Let's do something together. I run this podcast series like all the people I've had on before. Let's do something. And so I've gotten responses from very big people that have later on, like for whatever reason, they couldn't do it for personal reasons or otherwise. But with regards to like the people that I've had on though, it's just me reaching out by contact information, or in like the case of Julian, a mutual friend, and then just being like, hey, I would be interested in this. And then they're sometimes down, sometimes not, but when they are, it's always super duper cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, it's I don't know. It's funny, but so, all right. So you're saying that, that I cut you off there, but you're saying that you kind of got started with the first one, second one, like,
well, the first guy. Yeah. So with him, I messaged him. I still have like the 20 emails that we had, like scheduling it back and forth. And I remember I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning because he was in Asia at the time. He travels across the world. He has tons and tons of money now. But when he was in Asia, like I had to figure this out because I'm like, do I really want to wake up at 4 in the morning? And, then I did it once and I woke up at 4 in the morning, and I even rented a mic from the library because my library has like the library of things you can take out. So it's not really renting, but I took out this microphone. And I took out a computer too, but I never used that. But I took out this microphone and I had my Beats Studio Buds, kind of like, or not the Beats, Bose. So I did that. I plug it all in and we do the interview. And that was the first episode, which is still up on my channel.
And how long was it?
50 minutes, 55 minutes, something like that. It was nearing an hour. But the guy was super gracious. It was the first episode, but second guy I had on, because then like, and I say this to people where it's like the difference between the first guy I had on and the second guy I had on, the amount of time was something like months, literally like months and months and months. Because after that, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do it again. Like then I do the second one, and I even talked to my social studies teacher about it. I said to her, I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. Like this doesn't seem like, because not like out of a lack of interest, but just because I'm like, do I see this doing something better? Like, do I see this as going in further or whatever reason? And then I'm like, because I'm reaching out to other big YouTubers and they're not getting back to me. And I'm reaching out to like one every couple days and they might get a response. I was kind of lazy about it. But then next thing I know, I'm like, you know what? I'm not just going to interview YouTubers. Because after I got the second guy on, I was going to interview just YouTubers and influencers, but then I figured out that wouldn't probably work as well. So then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to interview a Navy SEAL. That seems like a really cool guy to interview. That's the third guy I had on. He actually sent me his book to my house. He had like a signed copy of it.
No way.
Yeah, he had a message in it too. It was really cool. But But then after that, I'm like, let me see if I can have this guy on. And then that guy. And like the fourth guy I had, I think, was the judge in the Chris Christie Bridgegate case, right? Like I had him on as the fourth guest. And then the fifth guest, I forget who he was, but like it keeps going. And then eventually I had Jim on, then I had Julian and like other big YouTubers. And yeah.
It's so funny because so Jim, the first time he came over, we just hung out here, we had lunch, and he said to me, he's like, you know, I saw him on Julian's podcast, and he was like, hey, I want to introduce you to Julian so that he can kind of like, you know, guide you a little bit, give you a little bit of advice. He's a couple years ahead of you with what you're doing. I think you guys would get along well. And Julian just happened to call him as we were hanging out.
Right.
And he was just happened to become an affiliate the next day. So it was like,
that was perfect.
Yeah. Everything worked out. We spent a bunch of time together. It was great. But then after, like, I don't know, a couple weeks later, he said to me, he's like, hey, like I met this kid, George, that I want you to kind of do the same thing to. And I was like, yeah, like that's incredible. I mean, sure, introduce me, please. And then when I came across your stuff, I was just like, I was mind blown. I was mind blown because I know how hard it is to ask questions,
right?
And to be direct. And there's really, like, does it come naturally to you?
No. So, and it's a good thing that you brought this up because I've had this thing with myself where I always have to ask, how honest do I want to be in my questions? And also like, because again, when I first started, first episode, I have no problem with being able to talk for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, and this is something that's universal with everybody I've almost ever met, where it's like, I have the ability, it's and this is something that's funny because I also related to Matt Cox about it, where I'm like, I'm able to talk for tremendous amounts of time because I try to explain every detail of something, which might not be necessary. But when you know what? It's funny because I just forgot what you asked.
If it came naturally.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
ask
okay.
the
Yeah. So
questions.
right. So what I was getting at was with the questions. With the first episode, right? I like talked kind of through the whole thing, and I didn't like that I did that. Like looking back, I'm like, man, I talked way too much. Second guy had it was 50-50, but I still talked too much, and I realized I'm like, I didn't like that. Third guy, I was asking like mostly just questions, right? Basically almost all just questions. Super cool guy. But then like same thing again and again. And then eventually I'm like, well, I want to be me, like when I'm doing this. Like I want to ask things I'm curious about.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want to ask different people about the same thing in some cases. But then also too, when I'm doing the podcast, like I also have to think like, am I repeating myself? Because when I first meet some people and we have a certain conversation or a certain path, I'll just repeat the same thing. Every podcaster does it, or most people do it at some point. But with me, I was just repeating the same thing, like same story where I'll be like, oh, I met Jeremy Fragrance, for example, in Miami. I told you about it over the phone. But like then like when it's on video, it's not the same thing. So to answer your question about does it come naturally? No. And that's just for the simple fact that like I've had to kind of learn to be more like myself on video. Like now I'm basically the same person for the most part.
Yeah.
Also too, when I'm like I think one of my friends pointed out, he's like, why were you more genuine on Julian's show than like you were with interviewing this guy? And I'm like, well, part of that was just because of the method of interviewing.
Yeah.
Like with a virtual interview, like it's kind of like a phone call. With this, like I'm seeing you. I'm also in a very comfortable position. I mean, then again, I do it on my bed, so like it's not that big of a deal.
But it's so, and we haven't done and I want to refuse to do it as long as possible, and probably maybe always, unless we do like a separate kind of like shorter, like 30-minute interview style, because it's so hard to do the Zoom thing. You know, it's like it's just you don't feel for me personally, like I need to feel somebody's energy. I need to go back and forth. Like I call this like, this is ping pong to me. Like this is, you know, and you're reading somebody's, like when you're talking, I'm reading a bunch of different things about your body language so that I can conceptualize in my head like what to say next. Like I'm like processing, you know, in the same way that you said over explaining things. Like that's how my brain works. Like it's like there's so many fucking, you know, whatever. And on Zoom, I personally can't do that as much.
Right.
It's like I like interject or don't know, you know, it's like it's much tougher, but
it's awkward.
Yes, it can be. And that's the thing. It's like you step on each other if you say the wrong, you know, at the wrong time or audio. Right. But the advantage is obviously that you've learned is like the people that you can connect with It doesn't, there's no, hey, what time is like, there's not as many hurdles.
Well, that's definitely part of it. Because I don't have to buy a flight for somebody and like a hotel, and like Julian, again, he pays for everything, or like most things at the very least. Because I think when I scheduled his interview with Viola, or not scheduled it, but when I introduced them, Julian called me. Funny enough, when I was at work, but he called me. He's like, we're gonna fly him out, like, and stuff like that. And I'm like, and it's just the fact that he said we, like him, as in, so that means like he pays and does so much. Yeah. So and that's something I will get to eventually, but for right now, and also too, some of the people I can't do any other way. Like I couldn't do the interview in person, or at least I wouldn't want to, or they wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Like Jack Reissider, for example. He is a very, very private guy. He didn't even want to show his face in the interview.
Yeah.
So, someone like him, and I think I even said to Julian, it's funny because this is on the back end. I said to him, like, this is so much better than doing a virtual interview. And he's like, look, bro, I made this promise to myself that I would never do a virtual interview unless if your name was Snowden, Edward, or Assange, Julian.
And it's again to each not to each their own, but it's also situational. Right. It's like whether you can or can't, and like that's part of the thing. And in person, for me personally, especially like with the topics that we talk about, because a lot of times like with mental health topics, like we talk about some like intense stuff that like, I don't know, I don't really want to ask somebody about their trauma or like different things in their life over a computer. Like it just doesn't.
It's not the same.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like, again, like you said about, and thank you for saying that, because like one of the things Max and I care about most is creating a comfortable environment for people to come in. And it's like, that's why we have the couch. You know what I mean? It's not just like, because podcasts
it's a comfortable couch.
Too. Yeah. Shout out my mom. But when you're sitting, like most podcasts are set up at a table with two like, chairs, which is great, but it's just for me, it would be a little bit tougher. To sit across, because I'm like, even with the swivel chair, like I'm fidgety, I'm like all over the place, I'm constantly moving. So like, I don't know, I couldn't do it. But what have you learned about yourself? Like, because again, you're saying you were overweight freshman, kind of like didn't.
Yeah.
Would it be? And I don't want to be assumptuous, but did you feel like you fit in high school or in that freshman year? Because, and I'm just asking because the way that your brain works, is incredible. You know what I mean? Like that, you're not talking about things that seem like normal high school conversations. Like, I didn't care about any of the stuff you're talking about in high school, which is like good for you.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that there's challenges to that as well.
Well, I mean, like not so much right now. But like freshman year, it's like, I always would try to like interact with so many different people because I'm like, because I always felt like I had to kind of like fill the time or like kind of do what everybody else was doing, even if it didn't make me happy. That is true. So like, for example, I would just talk to somebody because I felt the compulsion to talk to them because I felt like I needed to, more than like I actually cared about what they were saying. And I couldn't tell you the amount of conversations that like looking back were just really not worth having, or like people that I've spoken to that like didn't really interest me all that much, that it really didn't, and whatever. But to your point about like the fitting in thing, where it's like, not so much sophomore or like now, which is
little police chase going on outside,
which is junior year.
We apologize.
Yeah, it's all right. But like you kind of want to, like for me, I've always been happy with like 1 to 3 friends, right? Always. That's always how I've been, where I just want to have like one friend that I'm really close with that I really like, and that's it, or like 3. And that's fine, but it's like when everyone else is like, oh, that's like not good, or like that's not what you're supposed to be doing, then you kind of look at yourself and you're like, oh, maybe that isn't. Like, even if you feel that it is, like, and you're fine with it, people will tell you the other way around, and then you'll start to question that. So that's part of it. But it's not like, it's not as much of like an ongoing battle as it is now, because like it used to be like this constant compulsion to have to talk to somebody. Right. Where now it's more of just like, I'll talk to who I want to talk to and who I care about. Like for this, I care about this conversation. But like if somebody's talking about whatever, I don't feel strong with compulsion to be like, oh, I like chocolate ice cream too. Like, it's like a, the conformity example where people are like, everyone's saying they like chocolate ice cream. And then you say, well, it sucks, but everyone else is saying it. So I like chocolate ice cream too. And you really don't. But that's kind of how it felt for like freshman year and like middle school too.
I wonder how much what you're doing has affected like your confidence as well. Yeah. Because I think a big thing about what you're talking about is like being comfortable with silence. Yeah. You have to be comfortable with yourself. Right. People who, and again, like I only say this because like I was exactly like that. Yeah. It's like I was exactly like that where it's like nobody's talking. It's like I don't want this to be awkward. It's like because I like, like your nervous system, like you start to feel this like anxiety of like I gotta like we gotta say something. But as I've gotten a little bit older, I've realized like true comfort and true like being cool with people is like comfortable with the silence. Right. Where you're just enjoying each other's presence, even if there's nothing to be said. You don't have to fill that kind of like dead time. Yeah. You don't always have to say something. And there's a good quote you reminded me of. My uncle tells me it all the time. And I think it was something like the root of the majority of man's problems is that he cannot sit with himself in silence for like a long period of time. Yeah. I think it's just, he just can't sit with himself in silence. I think that's what he said. But yeah, you are absolutely right. Most people are highly uncomfortable with themselves. Yeah. Right. And I've known how that felt like for various reasons, whether because of my weight or like, anything or like, oh, I don't look as good or it's like, I'm not doing the same thing as this person. It's like, well, instead of just saying, well, I like doing this thing, people, including myself, tend to like develop an identity around somebody else's identity or other people's identities or even their perception of them, which then can be this really toxic battle of like, well, who am I? Like, what do I actually like? Because that's something I've had to deal with the past like year or so where I'm thinking to myself, like, I spent like a lot of time just saying like, yeah, I like that too. Or like, yeah, let's go do that thing together because I like doing that thing too. And then eventually you realize you're like, I don't like this thing. But then you also have to go to the next step of like, what do I like? Yeah. It's funny. It reminds me of, I talk about therapy a lot in here. I've been in therapy for years. And one of the first sessions I ever remember focused around the topic of like, okay, say you're with like 3 friends. And this was, 21, 22 years old. Say you're with 3 friends and we're talking about going out to dinner. Right. And somebody brings up going out to get, Indian food. Like I hate Indian food. I've never liked it. Right. Like I wouldn't say anything. I would just say, yeah, sure. Like I'm down. Instead of like feeling the uncomfortableness to say like, oh no, I don't like it. Do you think we can go like Mexican food? Yeah. Like just that little thing takes a lot of like at least for me, it took a lot of soul searching. And that's really like, I mean, everybody, struggles with it, which makes sense. Especially in high school, because like who doesn't want to fit in? Yeah. Why wouldn't, we're social creatures. Yeah. Well, for me, it was more of like, not really like the fit in like stereotype, like it was always the fact that everybody else would do and say one thing. And then I'd be like, well, yeah, but I like doing things this way. And it's like, oh, well, that's just like a bad way of doing things. And then you kind of like, okay, I guess it is. You get told enough that like, you start to think like, okay, this is a bad way of doing things. Because with me as a kid, like I only ever really needed 1 or 3 friends, and I was completely fine with that. And then it's like people tell you, well, no, you have to have more friends. And it's like you don't. Yeah. And people tell you that like enough. And then you're like, well, maybe I do. Like maybe I need to do this thing that everybody else is doing, even if you don't have any interest in it at all, which is very, very toxic, as you can imagine, like over time. But it like nothing, like there's nothing like I can do about it now, like looking back, but it's just, I like doing this. Yeah. Right. Like now I know what I like. Yeah, exactly. That's the, some people think it's like a joke, but like the term like high school is forever. Like once you leave high school, you realize like life is still a popularity contest. Yeah. People like politics. Yeah. What are we doing? Who do you like the most? Yeah. Boss. How do you get a raise? Like, yeah, you got to hit your numbers, but who has the most gravitational like pull and power, and why? It's like kids that have even thinking about, say a kid's 25 years old and is like a VP at his company. Like I have some friends that are like, worked really fucking hard and really smart and like, have like that changes your status, your social status in the world, which I agree or disagree. It just is what it is at this point. But it keeps going. And it's funny to like look back at high school and realize like, it's still the same. It is what it is.
Well, two things. Number one, like it's something I guess I want to clarify. It's like it has not necessarily anything to do with bullying either, because bullying is something very different. It's also like you're just around people and they tell you to do one thing, or like they say one thing and you just want to be like everybody else, and everyone's like, and you're like, well, I guess I should be, right? Not that you actually have to be, or no, sorry, you feel like you have to because everybody else is, if that makes sense. Like you feel like, all right, well, if I'm the odd one out, there must be something wrong with me, even if there isn't.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That makes me, like, gives me flashbacks to like middle school type stuff.
Right.
And like I've mentioned it on here before, but like I like bullied kids, like in which like I look back now, I'm like, what the, well, it's like, I just wanted to be cool and I just wanted to be liked. And
so you did what you perceived would get you that.
Yeah. Which it did is the fucked up part is like it
does. Yes.
It does work. And it's like, and it was really just to be funny. Like I have a really good friend. His name's Aiden. I've talked about him a bunch. He's so smart. Yeah. He's like literally, I always call him, so he's my smartest friend.
Yeah.
And he's funny because of it. He's so witty. He's playing like mental chess with everything that he says. Right. But I didn't have that. You know what I mean? So you got to do something else to be funny. And like bullying kids is a cop out, easy. Like I'm not trying to be hard on myself, but like it's a low vibe way to be funny.
But but it works though.
Yeah,
it works. That's the difficult part that a lot of people don't realize, because with you, I'm assuming that you justified it to yourself with, this is just me being funny, right? And people must like it, so therefore it must not be bad. Am I correct in saying that?
I feel like I consciously potentially knew, but I also was just hiding the fact that I was hiding the fact that I was different in my head. Like I felt different. So instead of dealing with feeling different at that age, I just made fun of the kids that were different. Right. And this wasn't like I actually had a really bad year. Like, I don't know if I've even mentioned on here, but like 6th grade, I was like, again, I was being a little asshole after being like a really good kid in elementary school. And then my parents put me into private school for a year, and that kind of like really like whipped me into shape a little bit, because it was a whole different world. I went from public school, which was like chaos, and then I'm sitting in class with just like
perfect order.
Yeah. Yes. And wearing a tie and you know, it's like it's different, but you learn a lot. And like again, I think the topic of bullying, like have you ever had, like did you ever deal with that? Bullying?
Probably when I was like much younger. But like it wasn't, it's nothing like, you know, like from middle school on, like nothing really happened. It was more like, you know, little kid stuff too.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, is like a lot of it is, when you think about it at that young age, like the one thing that's helped me look back at that, like I'm talking about a 6th grade kid. I'm talking about like an 11-year-old or something, 10-year-old, like you got no idea what's going on in the world, you know, like at all. So,
right. Well, one thing I will say, and this is also, again, like going back to the conformity thing, because again, like bullying and conformity are very different things, but it's like a Venn diagram, like they're very related too. Like with you did it because you wanted to conform to basically what everybody else thought was funny. Even if you didn't think it was funny, you conformed because you're like, okay, well, this is the perception of what's funny. I'm going to change my humor to be what's funny. So I had a friend, right? And he was like super close friend for years. And he's a great guy overall. I want to clarify that. I think he was super cool. He was like my best friend for 3 or so years. But with him, he has two things: terrible decision-making skills and terrible judgment. So, you know, with him, if I were to tell him something like, dude, you don't do this, don't do that, and I would have like 19 billion reasons why, and I'll explain to him for an hour, right? Like just every single reason you can imagine. It's not that he would just fight back, but it would be to a point where he'd be like, no, like you just don't understand. Like you just don't understand. And then like not even a month later, he would then come to me and be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not friends with that kid anymore. And it'd be like the exact same reasons I said to him. I'm like, but I told you this. And he's like, yeah, well, whatever. It doesn't matter who said it first. And I'm like, but I tell you this a million times. And this, like, I've thought about just like, because we took a break, like we're on a break now, like as friends. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I do think the guy was great. And he's the same friend that I said, like, I went to buffet with, like, all the time. Super awesome kid. And he motivated me to work out too. And he motivated me to do a lot of things and also make better thumbnails on my videos too. And he encouraged me to do the podcast. And as awesome as he was, he would always make the same mistakes over and over again. And like, sometimes I would stop saying things to him because it would just be like talking to a brick wall or like punching a brick wall, where it's like, you might be putting all your effort into this, but it's not gonna really make a dent. So I would be saying to him, like, well, he would come to me like, yeah, that guy's such an idiot. I'm like, yes, this is why you should not be talking to this person, or you should not be doing this with this person. And he'd be like, yeah, but you don't understand. Yeah, but nah, like, yeah. Or, you know, I would confront, or another thing too, he would tell other people, like, you can't be doing this. And then he would do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So why do you think that is with people? Like, not even like that situation specifically, but why do you think that is with,
like, what, you tell someone to do something
that are just consistently making the wrong decisions?
I think it's two things. Stubbornness, right? Like, they don't want to admit that they're wrong. It's probably the biggest one. I would say it's like their idea of being right is basically their identity in that, in some senses. Like, that does happen where people are like so hell-bent on being right that even if they're universally wrong. And there's a good movie, 12 Angry Men. Have you seen it?
No.
It's a really good movie. Yeah, your producer. He's it's a really good movie. And in the end, there's just one guy throughout the entire movie, and it's basically he got into a fight with his son or whatever, and the idea is that he has this bias against the guy that's on trial. Originally, the movie starts out with one person thinking he's innocent, the guy who committed the murder, or the boy, he's like 18. And then everybody else thinks that he's guilty. So the question is, how do you convince an entire group of people, if you think that they're innocent, how do you convince everybody else that they're not guilty, right? Or at least to a reasonable doubt. And it goes through this process of like people that are just super easy to like convince. It's like, oh yeah, like give them a little bit, like he gives them like a little push of evidence, and they're like, yeah, you know what? He's right. Yeah, he's probably not guilty, or at least I have a doubt. But then it goes on and on and on. Eventually, the last guy who, throughout the movie, it's like said that he got into a fight with his son, who is like kind of similar to this kid who killed his dad. So the idea is that this guy is just so hell-bent on disagreeing to a point where even after being shown all the evidence, to a point where it's impossible for the guy to be anything but innocent, he's like, I don't care, just make it a hang jury. And he has like this breakdown until eventually he's like, okay, he's innocent. Like, but that's a really good movie, number one. And we all watched that. Yeah. So I would recommend just watching it for yourself, because it's hard to like understand the entire plot of the movie. But to your point with like, why do people do that? Why do people make the same mistake over and over again? I think it's just stubbornness to change, and like laziness is part of that for sure. I've dealt with that myself, where it's like with eating, for example, like, you know, whatever, like
it's a good one.
Or with dieting or working out, where it's like I was so stubborn, and I would kind of justify it to myself with like, oh, I'm just working so hard in school, I just don't need, I don't need to work out, or, you know, I'm not as bad as this guy. So, you know, denying yourself too, justifying it. Laziness for sure though. And also just not wanting to admit that you're wrong. I think that's the biggest ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It's
people hate and I told you so. That's another one.
Yeah,
people
that's the worst.
Yeah.
there's it's funny. I feel like I talk about my mom a lot on here.
Right.
And there's so many situations where she'll do exactly that, where it's like, well, that's what I said 4 months ago. It's like, yeah, I know. And you were right. And I probably knew that too. Yeah. And the same thing was with my buddy Aiden, where it's like, he's like, well, isn't that what I'm like, yeah, I know you were right. And I knew you were right then too.
Yeah.
But there's always that, and I don't know if it's like ego or what it is, but it's like, well, I want to find out. Like you got to feel it first. And that's, again, personal stuff where it's like, to me, if you're going to tell me like, you know, don't cross the street or like something like that, where it's like, yeah, like I know I shouldn't cross the street, but until I get like my foot run over, like I might not feel it. I might not feel like the understanding why. And that's like a dumb example, but like I almost feel like in a lot of situations, people have to get hit. You know what I mean? Like they have to, like, just like you said with your friend, where it's like, well, like, yeah, maybe he didn't understand and maybe he thought, but like he still thought there were other ways out. And then it happens or something happens and it's like, okay, well, like, now I know.
Well, but I mean, he was such an extreme case. And again, and I really do want to stress if he's watching this, that I do think he's a good guy.
Yeah.
But, and I told him to his face like every other day. So it doesn't really make a difference if I say this, but he is basically one of the biggest hypocrites I've ever known, right? to like, not one of, he is like, and it's to such an extreme. It really was to such an extreme where I would literally say things over and over and over again. And he would just be like, you don't understand. You don't understand. Originally started out with like, you don't understand. Then he would kind of try to justify it. And then like, and with him too, like he would say one thing, right? He always would do this where he would say like, we should not do this, right? Or we would always try to give each other advice, but like he would be like, we should not do this, like, you know, or I should not do this. And, you know, or men should do this. Like for example, one was like, here's a big example. He was a big proponent of men settling their beefs by fighting. Like in a ring, like in an octagon, or just like gentlemanly disputes, basically, right? But then, and I always had a problem with that, where I'd be like, well, yeah, I know that sounds like a good idea on paper, and it probably does work for some people, but it's not going to solve every problem, sort of thing. But regardless, you know, he would justify it to like no end, right? And I'd be like, well, no, you shouldn't get into a fight, and like in this circumstance, you shouldn't do that. And he'd be like, yeah, but you just don't understand. Like, but, and he would always hit me with that. And eventually one day, and here's another thing he would always say. He's like, if somebody disrespects you, you should like fight them immediately, basically. Right. I'm like paraphrasing, but he's a big fan of like Sean Strickland's idea of like, you know, of if somebody disrespects you, you should immediately punch them in the face. Right. And, you know, I would tell him like, well, you know, it just doesn't work that way, right? Yeah. For a number of reasons, you know, mainly being nowadays everybody carries a knife or a gun. But then when he got pressed basically at one point where some kid, I think it was in class, tried to fight him, and I was like, and he tells me the story later, and I thought about it. And I'm like, you're the guy, and like I didn't say to him at the time, but I'm like, you're the guy who's like going to sit here and tell everybody else, like, you should be fighting. Yeah, men should fight their problems out. And like, if somebody disrespects you, you should fight them. And then you get a kid who apparently swung on you and you don't fight back. Like, and he told me, well, his exact words were, he's like, yeah, I started cursing at him and like I told him off, and like he immediately calmed down. He's like, oh man, I'm sorry, bro. But I'm like, even if you intimidated the guy out of a fight, like you didn't fight him. Like you talk this whole game of like, you're going to fight somebody. And I had this conversation with him at the last phone call we had at the end of our friendship, where I'm like, you had this whole big thing of like, and he would even say this to me where he's like, I can beat this guy up. I can do that. And I'm like, well, you're going to have this whole big thing of this whole big, like, I can fight anybody and I can win any fight, and everybody should be fighting each other, or like all, you know, or you should punch somebody in the face if they disrespect you. But then when somebody does try to fight you, you're not going to fight. And he knows how to fight too. There's the same, like, yeah, I don't know. It's just
do you still want to be friends with this guy?
Yeah. To some extent, like maybe not as close, but with him, because we're on a break. So what happened was he calls me one day and we kind of had to figure it out, where we're like, all right, like, because he called me and he's like, George, like, you know, I've been feeling like kind of weird about our friendship for things that like I had not necessarily, well, it's like little things, like, you know, like little arguments we had. And he's like, George, like, you know, you wouldn't do this. And I'm like, well, I've been kind of feeling the same way. We had this mutual feeling, and then we're like, all right, we had a distance. Like, we're always on top of each other, because I'd be eating lunch with this guy, you know, doing everything with him. And there's nothing wrong with that, but he was like almost like a sibling to a point where we're so on top of each other, we got a distance. Now we don't talk really as much, if at all. And it's fine though, but he even said, he's like, this is healthier than us being angry. But in that phone call though, I did say to him, like, well, the major problems that I've had with you and our friendship is like, I tell you something and I tell you over and over again and you don't listen. And it always never goes in your favor. And then afterwards you're like, well, it is what it is. Like, it doesn't matter, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, and then he's like, that's true. And he even said to me, he's like, yeah, I do talk a lot of crap. Like, I do say this and that. And, we ended off on good terms. So I'm not like trying to make him seem like he's this terrible person. He did do a lot of good things for me. He's paid for food. Like, we've gotten meals together. He's bought me a lot of like food and like water whenever I needed it. Great guy overall. But it's just, that was like, for me, it was always just that. That was always a big thing.
Friendships, I mean, friendships are like dating as well. They're partnerships, just like any relationship. And it's interesting to hear you think about it at that level. Because like, again, when I was in high school, like I never called my friend and was like, had a straight up man-to-man talk about where things were at.
Yeah.
Probably just like subtweeted, like dead ass. Like that's what the difference was. But the way, when you were saying that, it's like, I've been thinking about this idea lately where it's like everyone's operating, say this battery level where if you're at your best, you're crushing it, you're grinding, you're at 100%. Like some people are at 10% sometimes. And as we talked about before, we have no idea why. Right. Maybe he's struggling with something. Maybe he's trying to figure something out. Yeah. Maybe there's also, again, back to the social media and technology stuff, like that seems like a very, like you said with Sean Strickland, like, are those his ideas or are those ideas that he's seen on TikTok and Instagram and Reels and things like that and has soaked that in because it looks badass?
Yeah.
And like in theory, thinking about it, like, that sounds sick. But like, have you ever been in a fight?
Once in third grade and I won. It really wasn't a fight. Like, I just got super mad at a kid and I beat him up, which I still feel bad for.
Did you ever apologize?
I think so. Because I think his parents wrote a letter to the teacher.
That's not.
But it wasn't good. I still feel bad about that. There's certain things, and this is something I think about all the time, where it's like there's certain things that I did when I was like a little kid that I still think about. I'm like, why did I do that? That was terrible. Yeah. But
everybody does. I had a friend she was like one of my close friends in elementary school, and we still actually have been meaning to talk, but she reached out about the podcast at one point and apologized for like things that she had done in like 5th grade. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't even think about those things for a second of my entire life but like those things still sit with people. Yeah. And understandably so, because they're like, again, the low vibrational feelings of like shame, regret, different things like that. It's like nobody looks back on those memories and is pumped. And you might, this is the exact situation that you're going through with your friend. You might look back in 2 years and be like, look, wait a second, George, I was wrong. Yeah. You know what I mean? You might, because you're going to grow and you're going to change your perspective. You're going to meet people. You might come across a situation where it's like, oh, I understand what he was going through now, or I understand why he did,
Well, yeah. Well, I've actually done thinking about that. And I think I do understand. I'm not going to say like what I understand about it, but it's like, I do think I understand more of how he operated, like where he was coming from. Because again, like that was not the only thing that he would do where he would talk this big game and then like just not perform well, like, or not perform well, but he wouldn't stick to like, I believe this thing and like, and he's like so strong about it and he believes it to no end and he's like so like adamant, like he'll fight you tooth and nail on it, and then afterwards like. And sometimes he would change his mind the next day. That's another thing too. Yeah. But regardless about like what he would do, it's like I think I do understand where he was coming from, but I think again overall, and I still think about this where I'm like, do I not want to be friends with him? That's a good question. It's like, did I dislike him so much that I don't ever want to talk to him again? No, right? And was he like basically one of the closest friends I've ever had? Yeah. And was he awesome? Yeah. And would I, have dinner with him 1,000 more times? Probably. Yeah. And I really do like the guy. But it would be over and over and over again. He would kind of put us in the same situation and like, or I would do something kind of minor. He would have a problem. It was anything. Yeah. So I think like in a whatever amount of time, I probably want to get back and like start talking to him as a friend again. But I don't know. Because, I mean, he's a naturally very introverted person. Like, he doesn't feel the need to go out and talk to people. He gets along with people well. He doesn't have, like, social anxiety. It's not like that. But, you know, I see it more as just a sense of, I hope that we can be friends again. And we probably will. Yeah. Because we got along super well.
And everybody's got their different, hey, I've had some of the best friends in the world that, and this is another thing, even, sorry again, another police chase here.
Is what it is.
But yeah, sorry, Max, on the editing side. You go down different paths in life, and sometimes those paths deviate. You know, there's a fork in a road, and you're going left and right, and you're getting further and further apart. But sometimes they come back. I've got many friends that it's like we either didn't talk for years, or we got in a fight. And another thing about relationships, and I know everybody listening can relate to this. Sometimes you say the meanest things to the people close to you, the closest to you, because you have a comfortability and a level of trust that you're letting them see the entirety of your emotional state.
Right.
And that's a healthy thing. That means you have a close relationship. If you can have these tough conversations with him,
right,
that's a good thing. That means that you guys understand each other, you see each other, and even if you're not disagreeing, you know, or even if you are disagreeing, there's still something like really beautiful there, and maybe just something to think about. Because again, I don't know. It's just thinking about my own experiences with that. It's like, so those are some of my favorite friendships that have gone apart and then come back together.
Yeah. Well, I think also that is like, you don't know what you have until you don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, cause the way that like he called me, I don't know how he really felt. Like, cause it's funny because like he used the same line on me where he's like, I'll still say hi to you in the halls, which I know is like the same line that he's used to cut off people. Like, and he's told me. And when he said that, I'm like, it feels very weird being on the receiving end of this. But then like I talked to him a little bit more about it, and I'm like, well, look, I feel the same way. And he's like, oh wow, like, you know, this is like healthy and stuff. So ultimately I have a positive taste of, you know, a relationship. It's not like I ended off on like this terrible argument, but like it's normal for friends to argue. But the question is like, what extent? Like, at what point does it become like a toxic relationship?
Yeah,
that's a boundary a lot of people have to know. Like what is not acceptable. Where you're willing to cut things off.
So how much of this stuff, because again, you're talking about this and it's like, I'm mind blown because I don't think I ever knew what the word toxic relationship meant or toxic friendship meant in high school. Like, again, we just weren't aware of these things. And I think a lot has to do with social media. A lot has to do with making assumptions.
Yeah.
And we actually just scheduled with my old 7th grade teacher, and she's coming in. She's now the like executive director at an online alternative learning program. Right. And essentially what she's coming in to talk about is like the differences in, you know, she's been in the education system for over 30 years. So it's like, what's changed? What happened 10 years ago, the way that things were taught is totally different now. Like, didn't you say that you have a stress management class?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Like, that's nuts to me.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, do you think that's a good thing? Because I go back and forth at all times where I'm like, you know, kids need to be taught these things.
Yeah.
But there's a level where it kind of, the pendulum swings back and it's like, okay, now they're like overly aware and overly like in their head and constantly thinking about these things instead of like learning these things. They're almost being told how to feel.
Right.
And that's a dangerous, like, again, you know, you can be a part of the solution and part of the problem at the same time.
Well, what I will say about that is I actually have a good answer with the stress management. I think it's a great idea, but I think it's terrible in practice. So
expand. Yeah.
When I say that, I mean, as in, it's like, if you pay attention and stuff, it's good. But the problem is it's a PE class technically, right? It counts as a PE class. So the teacher is like fresh out of college. She's like probably your age, you know, if not a little bit younger in some cases. Like I think the youngest teacher I had was like 25, you know, first year teaching, and it's like this young 25-year-old lady, and she's like, all right, class, all right, you know, do whatever you want, basically. Just fill out the sheet by the end of class, and everyone's with their friends, and nobody really cares. So it's like, or it's like, oh, we're gonna watch Inside Out. It's like, well, and but everybody's
great
just,
movie.
It is a great movie, yeah. But like everybody in that class is just doing their homework, including myself. Everybody's just doing their homework, you know, maybe talking to their friends or whatever. But the point is that when I say it's terrible in practice, I mean, as in nobody cares, right? I care a little bit, like I'll pay attention to some extent, but it's like just to get my work done,
Yeah.
right? And I use it really more as a conduit to get other homework done.
So what's the curriculum like? What are you being taught? Are you guys just talking about your feelings, like emotions? Like
Well, in stress management, it's like in stress management specifically.
Yeah.
Well, kind of like that's the idea. The idea is that you're supposed to be doing this, but in practice, like you have just think about the idea, right? You're going to have like the super serious, like something that should be taught more seriously that's taught by like super young lady that kind of doesn't care herself, who's like a PE teacher and like nobody else cares. And everyone's doing their homework. And like they're kind of pushing, they're like, oh, can you tell us like what your favorite color is? Or like, can you tell us what your like a funny memory or something like that? So in practice, like the class is taken not very seriously.
Yeah.
Right. And nobody cares. And again, that includes me because I've thought to myself, like, she doesn't care if I do homework in this class. Like, you know, she doesn't care if I'm doing homework for the next class in this class. As long, like, as I also get what she's asked me to do. And even if I didn't, you know, would she really care or notice? Probably not. So for me, it's also very hard to care. And that's someone like who is kind of interested in that, like, you know, how to be more productive, for example. So the idea that if I'm not interested in that class, there's kind of a problem, you know, I would say with the class.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because it's all of these ideas in practice,
Right.
like how do you actually apply them and what's the right way to do it? And the more that I've thought, because I've been thinking about this for, you know, a couple of years now and I've been like writing about it, having conversations with, because one of my goals is to eventually go do speaking at schools to like talk about mental health, talk about, again, different ways to approach things. And one of the things that I'm learning is like, the pendulum all the way on that side isn't good either.
Right.
Because it doesn't, again, then people, that's how they learn it. So then they disregard it in the future. But at the same time, on the other side of things, because I like disagree with myself all the time. Yeah. You know, it's just like I, think one thing's a good idea, but then there's the other side, and then there's the other side. It's like constantly trying to find like where do I really stand on something. Yeah. And a line that I read in like I think it was The Body Keeps the Score. What's all about like trauma and trauma living within the body.
Right.
A lot of times you can't stop traumatic experiences from happening. Like there's a ton of like child abuse stuff going on right now. Like it's a hot topic.
It's always,
rightfully so. It should be. You can't necessarily stop certain things, but you can prepare kids to have the ability to recover later in life.
Right.
So you can show, again, if and that's all they need is one memory, one little thing of like one that they can look back on, or one person in their life who made, because like I think that there was a study they asked like, is there one person that you felt safe with? And if you had that one person, you could then reteach your body, relearn how to feel that way again.
Yeah.
But if you had nobody that you ever felt safe with or ever felt like acknowledged you, then the percent, I forget what the exact percentages are, but it's like a massive difference. You just need that one person. And I think what I'm going to talk to, her name is Megan Palovich. I called her Mrs. Pal, of course, but she was kind of like that one person for me.
Right.
Like, and I had actually, I mean, not, she was one of many people, but I'm saying like she, in a specific way, like she taught me poetry and she really taught me about myself, and I felt comfortable, and she didn't judge me for acting up, you know, didn't like yell at me, and just kind of let me be me. And I think that's really important for teachers these days, to just let kids be kids. Yeah. Like let them mess around, Yeah. And like one of the things we are going to talk about is like, I have this idea, I'm mind blown that it's not being put into action or even talked about. Like, why aren't we cutting down, like mental health and physical health are two of our biggest problems in society right now. Right. Why are we not cutting down on class time and just having kids play more? Yeah. Like kids are on their iPads at all times. Yeah. All the time. Right. So like just have them have like 2 recesses a day, and let the recess be 45 minutes instead of like 25 minutes or 20 minutes. Let them run around. Like it's, I don't know, to me, it's isn't that easier for the teachers too?
Well, there's a great documentary I watched called Where to Invade Next. Right. And most people don't know about this documentary.
I've never heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember in like 4th grade, I got like super interested in like why the fact that we have homework. Because elementary school, I was like the best student you could. I was both the best and the worst student you could ever have. So like I would perform super duper well in classes and stuff, to a point where they were like, okay, like are we gonna skip him a grade? And then like,
It's like the least surprising news today.
But then when it came to what's it called, like how I'm socializing or interacting with the class or like just whatever, like emotional things, like I just was like below that. So then that's like a very strange dynamic where it's like you get the highest score in a class, right? And you know, they tell your mom that, and it's like, well, you know, like we might have to like skip them a grade, and then afterwards you also can't interact with people, or like you struggle basically. Like you don't have like as good social skills as like maybe somebody else, or you don't get as along with as many kids or whatever, which I think looking back is also like the people tell you something and then it's like you feel like it's okay, but you know, other things like I did do that were stupid. But what did you ask again?
We're just talking. I mean, that's an interesting point. I actually have a question about that, because in my mind, like everything balances.
Yeah.
So if you're intellectually at a really high level, your brain only has so much room.
Right.
If it's, you know, if baseline's, like I used to use a 1 to 10,
right.
Like baseline's 5 for everybody and you're working at a 9.5. Well, something else has to be, you know, missing out at that age. So like, maybe your social skills, maybe your athleticism, maybe your whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And that just is what it is. You can't be sick at everything.
Right.
You just can't. Like I wrote this blog about like, this is like one of the only things blogs I ever really wrote. Like all these superstars.
Right.
Yeah. Their life looks sick. Look at how many of them are divorced. Look at how many of them are estranged from their kids. Yeah. Look at it, and their families. You can't have it all. And like, you know, even at that age, like that. Yeah. Again, it is what it is. And did you care? Like, did you care about, like, did you want to skip a grade? Like, were you aware?
Kind of. Like, I feel like I insisted on it, but I don't know what ultimately happened though, because I wasn't like in the back rooms like with that. So I wanted to, because I'm like, yeah, this is like good. Because I was always like, as a kid, and I'm talking like K to like 5th grade, I was like tunnel vision, and I just had like 1 or 2 friends that I really, really liked. And that was it. That's all I needed. Like, and I'm talking like from preschool. Like, I just one kid. I have 2 kids actually, and I still remember their names too. Like, which should say something about me. But you know, the fact I just had those 2 people, and I'm like, these people I'm fine with hanging out with. I don't need to necessarily expand. It's not. I don't even think it was like a lack of social skills. Really, I think it was more of just like I like hanging out with this person. And I'm going to hang out with this person, and that's it. Like, I don't need 50 different friends. I just need like 1 or 2 people, and that's fine. So like, I think part of that is like, that's not, you know, normal. So therefore something must be wrong. Other things were also too, like as a kid, I would just cry a lot, you know, I don't know why I would, I would just cry a lot for anything. I think part of that was just a compulsion to like, if something bad happened, first reaction. And also I had like kind of some bad teachers in elementary school, like in different ways, like they just didn't manage things well. But you know, I'll say that.
Sorry, it just makes me laugh.
But there was one. I'm sorry. I was trying to get back to the documentary though that I mentioned before, because we got completely sidetracked. So the movie Where to Invade Next, it follows this guy. I don't know his name. This is a documentarian. He's going across the world, basically exploring how all these different systems work in different countries. And the main 2 that I remember are the prison system and the education system. It's rated R. I don't remember. I think it's just because he cursed a lot. There's probably some scenes I forgot about, but like it's mainly the prison system and the school system that it focuses on. And it's a really good movie, and it's super underrated. I think he meets with the president of France at one point to talk about something. But throughout that whole movie, though, he's going on about how Finland is, for example, I think it's Finland. I think they're the happiest country in the world. I think it is something. But they have like 3 hours of school every day. And like when you have a kid, the government literally sends you a baby package. Like they send you like the clothes and everything, like a starter kit almost for like having a baby. Yeah. That's pretty cool. You know, we don't have that in America. But number one, they have that. They have and And with work too, for example, they have like siestas in other countries where you go home, you take a nap, you eat lunch with your family, and then you go back. Right here in America, that doesn't really exist. You go on a lunch break and then you go back.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a very like work-based life. Is there anything wrong with that to some extent? No. But you also have to be very mindful of like, where do you want your time to be spent? Where do you want your energy to be spent?
It makes me laugh because I got this mug right here. I don't know if you call it like the fourth episode we did. My friend Dan Polzello.
Yeah.
He's a comedian and he does like all these Instagram skits on like EU, like working in Europe versus working in America. And it's like, America's this grind time lifestyle. Like, you know, I'll do anything for the company. Like, you know, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. And then in Europe, it's like, all right, we're working for a couple hours a day. We're taking a long lunch. We might have a beer. Like, it's like, all right, everyone chill out. And you know, the differences are crazy. But again, relating like the person, like I just said about if you're operating at a 9.5. Okay, well, America's operating at a 9.5 as far as like making money goes, creating things, technology. So where are we going to lack? There needs to be some
lack. Yes.
Yeah. There's going to be some other thing. Yeah. And it's like the baby thing. It's like, yeah, we're not going to get like, I don't know if we're going to get there, but like it doesn't surprise me. It makes sense, you know? And again, that's part of my, you know, the past 6 months trying to learn about these things and be like, all right, what can we really control? Why does this happen? And understanding, like you said in that documentary, is like, well, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But are they going to have the drive to create these biggest like ideas in the world and make things happen?
Right.
Like, no, because the incentive structure is not the same.
It's to be more relaxed and enjoy your life. And that also relates to people and their vices, for example. Where do people lack? So celebrities, for example, are always getting into controversies, mainly because they're just people. But another part of that is also like Jordan Peterson, for example. I like his stuff, but he was heavily addicted to benzodiazepines for 2 years. I think it was. And he had to take 2 years to like wean himself off him. But like, this is one of the best psychologists in the world. And he's like so tremendously stressed. And you can watch a video on it. But like, he was so stressed that like, he's like, all right, you know what? I can prescribe myself Xanax. I'm going to do that. And he just started doing it over and over again to the point where he needed to sleep and like do anything. And that's not a good way to live at all. But then like, you start to think, well, it's like, well, this guy knows how bad Xanax is. This guy is probably one of the most aware people that he could be. He'll say that he isn't, or that he wasn't aware, but like in general, that guy would know more about how Xanax works and psychology behind it than probably anybody else. So if this guy's prescribing himself Xanax because he's stressed, that kind of has something that says a lot about people in general, that people are very willing to just numb their problems with something else.
Yeah. And everybody's doing it. And that's the thing is we talked, I think, on the phone the other night about all of this stuff. I was like changing my entire perspective. Like it's all entertainment at the end of the day.
Right.
Like, yes, we host a mental health podcast because I think that these topics need to be talked about. I think that feelings need to be talked about. I think ideas need to be talked about. I think thoughts need to be talked about in a different way, in a different way than even they, you know, like let's really drill down. But at the same time, if it's not interesting, if it's not entertaining, if somebody's not enjoying it, if somebody listens to this and doesn't get anything out of it, I wasted their time and I feel terrible about that.
Right.
Like I don't want to do that. You know, it's like I want people to enjoy it, to feel a part of it, to like, you know, it's but at the end of the day, like it's also realizing like, okay, well, if you don't, like we talked about the thumbnails, like I've been really Joy and I went back and forth on this. It's like, even with like headline or like, you know, naming episodes and things like that. It's like, well, if you can use a little bit more shock value, or if you can use a little bit, and Julian calls it true bait, and he's right. Like, he said like some of the titles, like some people would consider it clickbait, but like clickbait's not real. It's leading you down the wrong path.
It's a scam. Yeah.
Yeah. Like true bait is like, you know, it might be a sensational title, but
it's an exaggeration, but it's not untrue.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's what they were talking about. It might just be said in like the most, you know, entertaining type of way.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like you still kind of got to do that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do actually want to say about Julian's thumbnails, it's funny because I realized this. If you pay attention to his face and you scroll down each of his thumbnails, I realized that he reuses a lot of the same pictures of himself going, you know, or, and it's kind of funny. I don't know. It's because it just reminds me of like other YouTubers, but no, it's funny. I don't mind it, but I realized, I'm like, wait, as I was like looking at his thumbnails, I'm like, what's going on? Plane?
Yeah. Oh no, it was just it was like a different.
Oh yeah, it's a plane. Yeah, no. But yeah,
Sorry for everybody listening. There's just like this interesting looking plane that just flew by.
Well, I mean the view's great. So I know everybody. Your producer Max even said that. Like
it's fun.
Yeah.
But so back to the thumbnail. So I actually got to watch Julian make a thumbnail one time, and it took him like 5 or 6 hours. And then after I left, bless you.
Thank you.
He worked on it for another like 5 or 6 hours. And the amount of thought that goes into each and every decision, whether it's the colors, whether it's the eyes, whether it's he'll make, it looks like he reuses like certain facial expressions, but he will go through 50 different thumbnails, ideas, it's like, and I just saw him do it and I was like, holy shit. Because again, for these YouTubers, especially, he's actually had a couple of big YouTubers on lately.
Yeah, I know. Tommy G.
Yeah. Brandon.
You said he mentioned my name. I didn't.
I forget which one it was in. It might've been in a different episode.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, but, it looks effortless, and that's what like good art is, and good content is like, where it looks like they're just like, doing this on the fly. It's like, really, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And that's again, I think that's what Julian's been doing a great job of on his, like, getting into what the process is like, why people did that, like all of it. It's, cause there's a story to be told. It's not just somebody putting stuff up on the internet and it just all of a sudden takes off and works. And that's what I loved about Julian, the episode that we did, like that was one of the coolest ones because we really walked through his entire story of like how he got there and like the amount of stuff it took. And like, if you go back and watch it, like his early ones, like it's like very, very intentional,
right? And
very thought out. And again, like planning for 6 months or longer to like, have a plan of like what he was going to do. Yeah. Which is why I think it's really cool that the way that you did it was just like, I just started and just, thought about it, did it, took a couple months off and then, kept it rolling again.
Well, I mean, there's been points where I'm like, do I want to keep doing this? And who do I want to get on? And who do I want? Like, what do I want my content to look like? Right. Yeah. Where I'm like, I think about this all the time where I'm like, who do I want to have on? I've been more selective with my guests. I'll say that. Because there was like a point where I just had anybody on where I was like, and I mean, I don't have anything against any of these people, but it's like, there was just, and I've been thinking about this in general a lot too, where it's like, there's some guests I think about more than others, right? Like Jim, my conversation with Jim, I think about a lot, right? Even though it was only for like an hour or so, I think about it because.
Tell me why, yeah.
His interview changed the way I see government entirely. So, well, it was him and it was the judge that I did the interview with, but it was like the end of the judge's interview. But with Jim, it changed the way I see the government in the sense of like everything boils down to self-interest. And there's a good movie. I forget the name of the movie. It's been all over TikTok and Instagram, but it's a scene where he's like, if you want to become rich and you want to have all the money in the world, you have to, there's one question that will drive you there. What is in it for me? So when Jim and I had our conversation, both off and on the air, and I mean, he didn't tell me anything crazy off the air that he didn't want me to say. So, but everything our conversation boiled down to was just the fact that the government and like all these people that he's investigated, whether it be people in power, mainly people in power, just all the flaws that occur when you're trying to investigate someone like that. And again, this is the former head of the New Jersey FBI telling me that people call in favors for each other all the time. There's one case in particular, Faith Hochberg, that he talked about that I was insane to me, which is that this woman, U.S. Attorney General for, I think, New Jersey, she, I'm trying to think what she did. Yeah, so her husband was committing insurance fraud. And when he was a doctor, but he was committing the most insane insurance fraud. Jim like will even tell you this, that he's like ever seen. It's like clear as day, not this day, but clear as day. Just insurance fraud, right? And they had not only camera footage, they had audio recordings of him. I assume wiretaps too when he says audio recordings, but every type of insurance fraud you can imagine, where he's sitting in the Bahamas, not having any patients, and he would say, bill this patient for this and bill this patient for that. So they get a search warrant. Obviously, the judge is perfectly fine with giving them a search warrant because he agrees there's a lot of evidence. They go to raid his house. As soon as they get to the door, all of a sudden they get a phone call from someone that works for his wife's office, right? Who is, again, the U.S. Attorney General of New Jersey, who is the federal prosecutor for New Jersey. They call him and they say, the search is off. And they leave. And again, this is the former head of he managed the entire New Jersey FBI. And he's telling me that. You know, it's such a crazy thing to have somebody that worked managing every little thing in the FBI, he was like the boss. He was the boss of like basically everybody in New Jersey. And he's telling me that. That's really bad, but it did. My point is that it changed how I saw government, that interview. Then there's, ask your question.
Well, I was going to say, that's something that I've actually, through a lot of these conversations, same type thing. Like the perspective that I have on reality and the way the world works has changed drastically in just the course of a year, because you're having these conversations, you're talking to people and it's like, holy shit, this is how it actually works. So like Julian always, what I call him, he's like, bro, you just don't worry about this shit. Like, I get so in my head about it. And he's right. Like, it's like, that just is what it is. There's no, like at the same time, back to the high school being a popularity, like life being high school, popularity.
Yeah.
Doing favors, having each other's backs, loyalty. Yeah. None of this is surprising with the way that the system is set up.
Right.
People want to complain about it, but at the same time, a lot of people also benefit from it. The people who benefit from it are obviously going to keep using their benefit.
Right.
And that's what's going to naturally happen in this society. Even thinking about, I guess this doesn't matter about saying it all, but like I had a relative that was in like a policeman and chief of police, something like that. And I actually I don't even know if I met him, but I have a Fraternal Order of Police card in my wallet.
Yeah.
That like
a PBA card.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like if I, PBA, wait, that's
what it's called usually, a PBA card.
Okay. Oh, maybe, is it F?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever. I was like, wait, is it a different card? But yeah, so like I've gotten, in high school or something like that, like I'd get pulled over and I'd show the cop the card and they'd be like, all right, you're good.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's
a real thing that happens.
That's it. And that's the thing. It's like, everyone's like wants to talk about the cops and all these privileges and like they're not true. Well, yeah. Duh.
Why wouldn't they? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, you think the people that like, even the same thing with like people want to complain about senators and people in government, like buying stocks early. It's like, okay. Playing like the rules are the rules.
Right.
They're leveraging their power. Are we surprised? Like, is it like, I love the saying that one NVIDIA CEO said it, like reality minus expectations equals happiness. It's like, okay, like the expectation, if you look at it that way, is that the system is corrupt.
Right.
And it's going to be corrupt. So like when it gets corrupt, it shouldn't surprise you,
Well, I think a better way to look at that is, because again, I think that people can change anything. I don't like the mentality that you can't change something. I think that there's the other mentality though, which is better to have than, you can't change something. It's what do you want to spend your energy doing? As you would say, what do you want to manage your time doing? If you want to manage your time fighting corruption, go ahead, focus on it. It's not a life I would want to live by any means. That's like kind of the same reason I don't call myself a journalist, because I'm not like fighting for, this idea of, I got to get to the truth and I got to fight against corruption. Like, no, I don't want to fight anything. I want to just talk to this person and see what they have to tell me. And I've had people that have admitted very corrupt things to me, like that they've seen, but it's like, that's not the point of what I'm doing. I'm not here to change how the government works. I am curious though, what these people have to say, and I will talk to these people. But like I had this guy on, Everett Stern. The interview isn't out yet, but he is super interesting case. He worked for HSBC, which is a bank that is very, very well known to have affiliations with cartels and other criminal organizations for money laundering. And during that interview, I asked him, I'm like, what happened? And he was in the money laundering division, or the anti-money laundering division of the bank. And he said that there's filters basically, and there's for sanctions, right? for certain people. So like if it's a Russian oligarch that there's a sanction against, it'll just be his name that'll show up. So it'll be filtered automatically, or like transactions that could not go through. All of a sudden, he would see these people's names that were on the sanctions, and there would be a dot next to their name. And he'd be like, that seems weird. Why is this happening? And he would report this all the way up to the CEO's office. And he realized then that the reason that was happening was because there was people inside the anti-money laundering division of the bank that were, and he whistle blew this is all public now, but that were inside that bank, and they would quite literally be putting these dots next to people's names just for the sake of making sure that those transactions went through, because then the filter wouldn't pick it up because it wasn't the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so if it was like drug dealing corp, for example, it would be like drug dealing corp hyphen or drug dealing corp hyphen dot. So then if you search drug dealing corp, technically nothing would come up because the filters wouldn't reach it. So he brings it up to the CEO's office, nothing. Then he brings it to the CIA, and he didn't bring it to the FBI. But he brought it to the CIA because there was terrorist organizations that they were working with too. And then they said they were like tremendously interested in it. And I don't know what ended up happening with that. I think they did do something, but his point was that the banks only get fined, right? That HSBC has only ever been fined for this. They have never actually been held accountable for anything. There's nobody that's ever been held in front of Congress saying you did this, you have to suffer the consequences. No, there's nothing. It's just $200 million fine for the bank. And he even says it's like not even 5 weeks of their profits. So do they really care? No. If they're making billions of dollars from laundering a cartel's money, they will do so because that is benefiting them. So, and on top of that, James Comey, the former director of the FBI, was actually on the board of directors of that company. So that, that also kind of goes into a conflict of interest. And there was another guy he actually worked with who was like the head of counterintelligence at the FBI. I think his name is McConaughey or something, who got arrested on corruption charges because he was working with like Russian oligarchs. So, and this was a guy he was working with, and he's aware of everything that's going on. So, I try not to think like too much into like what's going on. And I have people like friends and stuff that text me like, dude, this just happened. And I'm like, well, think about like why it's happening. Like, who do you think is benefiting here? Right. Then you'll get your answer and they'll be like, oh, wait, yeah, you're right.
That's a good way to look at it. It's funny when you were saying that, it reminded me of, are you familiar with like Tim Donaghy, the NBA ref that was betting on games and kind of giving information on games to like different
insiders?
Bookies and I don't know, like moving lines and stuff like that. And then there's just recently the guy in the NBA that got suspended for life for betting on his own games, games he wasn't playing in, but still. But I think, and Jim would know much more about this than I would, but I think the FBI was ready to like really not take down the NBA, but really get to the root of the problem. And they were right at the doorstep, just kind of like you talked about with Jim. And then they stopped because the NBA, it was actually David Stern came out and kind of like, I don't know if he messed up the investigation, but he essentially like told on the NBA before the FBI was able to. So he got ahead of the story. Genius move. Respect. Like,
well, now we have the NBA.
Now we have LeBron, so we're fine.
Right.
But that's the other thing that's been disturbing to learn about. It's like this stuff is in everything.
Right.
And now the fucking PDD stuff really messed with my head for a long time because it's like there's snakes in the grass everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think I was like a very young, naive, kind of guy where I didn't realize that this evil exists in the world.
Right. And it does. Yes, very much so.
And again, now I'm getting to a better place where it's like, okay, well, the system allows that. And the other thing about like, do you want to fix the system? Do you want to fix the corruption? Do you want to fix? If you, and I actually just recently, Max, I don't know if we talked about this much, but like I recently, like I gave up like a lot of like unhealthy, like not even saying that coffee's unhealthy, but I try to like purify my body, like whether it be like no drinking, no coffee, no like no taking medicine, no anything, meditating, fasting. Like if you do it, if you give it up all overnight, it's not healthy.
Right.
Like you break, like your mind.
You give
breaks.
up immediately. Yes.
Yeah. Your mind, your body, like it goes through these drastic changes. Like the best way to do, I was talking to my boss the other day about like, okay, if I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day, I'm not going to just do 100 tomorrow. I'm going to do 10, 20, 30, 40. Like you have to slowly step these things up.
Right.
And I feel like that's what's happening as a society today. It's these things are starting to come out and they're being dripped. I think it's very intentional.
Right.
My perspective, very, very intentional.
Well, one thing, yeah. Finish what you're saying.
You go ahead.
All right. I was going to say with the systems thing, try not to look at it in the sense of the system is corrupt, because I feel like everybody says that. Nobody knows what that really means. You have an understanding of it. But when people say the system is corrupt, I want people to say, that power corrupts really. Is that people, when they're put in positions of power, tend to do things that will benefit them. And that's the truth. Yeah. And that's happened throughout all of history, that when you put somebody in a position of power, democratic or otherwise, they are very likely to do things that will benefit them. So it's not really the system. It's not like the entire system is corrupt. I hate saying that because, and I don't mind that you said it. The only reason it bothers me is only because when people say the system, it's like, that's such a broad term that nobody knows what it means. And it's like, well, who is the system?
And it's intentionally.
Right.
And that's the thing is I don't even know. Yeah, you're right. I don't know if corrupt is even the right word. If the system is operating how it's supposed to. The system is built for there to be back doors.
Right.
And like Andrew Bustamante says that about hey, we really knew what was going on. People would go crazy. So if the system's here to protect us and to distract us from the reality of I don't know, there's all these conspiracy theories and whatnot, but it's if the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing is meant to take your eye off the ball,
right,
maybe it's a good thing. I just try to have that perspective of hey, I'm so,
Well, one thing I will say about that conspiracy of distractive operations, I'll call them. I'm
psyops.
Yeah. Well, not psyops. Psyops is different. Psyops is that's part of it. It's a subcategory, I'd say. But just the idea of for example, when Bush went to war with Iraq, I think Britney Spears shaved her head. And people think that that's a big, distractive psyop where people are well, this is probably to take the eyes off of George Bush. Now, I disagree with that highly, and I think that those don't really exist as much as people would think, because it doesn't really benefit the government as much as you might think it does, because people are still going to be talking about it, and actually they're going to be talking about it a lot, but also too, I feel like people overestimate how much people really care about their government and what's really going on. Because where do people most get their sources? Where do people get the information that they're always talking about with Russia, Ukraine, for example? CNN, Fox, Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, Tucker Carlson, formerly. Now he's doing his own thing, but I know those people by name. That should also kind of tell you something, that they're not just faceless people that are just telling you information. They are celebrities. They are people that have a personality, and they are telling you the things that they believe in, that they are interested in. And if you go to Fox, it's going to be the inverse of whatever they're saying, right? So when it comes to the distraction theory, I don't think that really exists, because I think to some extent maybe, but to create a whole big event with a celebrity, I don't think that happens, or at least not as it probably has happened once. It's going to come out in 50 years in a declassified document, and people are going to be I can't believe that happened. Project Norwood or Northwoods, for example, with JFK. You know what I'm talking about, right?
No.
Oh, that's a whole big case. I'm not going to get into it all, but it's the idea that they could fake a I think it was Secretary of Defense at the time was saying to JFK that they could fake a terrorist attack or fake an attack to justify going to war with another country. I'm not going to get into that theory. I don't getting into conspiracy theories, but with distractive psyops, I don't think they exist, because there's not really an incentive to do so, because people are still going to be talking about it, and if they care enough, they will look into it further. So it doesn't shift away as much as you think. People still talk about Bush going to a war with Iraq, so it doesn't really change if Britney Spears shaved her head. And they talk about it way more than people would talk about Britney Spears shaving her head. So point is, I don't think it happens, or at least not that often, because I don't think it benefits government. However, what I will say is also too that with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, that is a huge financial incentive for both parties and the NFL.
Yeah, for everybody involved, the music industry in general.
Right. Well, Taylor Swift is the most famous woman in the world, hands down. There's nobody that can disagree. right? Like, I mean, yeah, sure, we've had Ice Spice, for example, in the past few years, but she's nothing compared to Taylor Swift. And they've done stuff together, but Taylor Swift is tremendously famous. So then she's marrying or dating, because I don't think she's ever been in a marriage, but she's dating one of the more well-known football players on the Chiefs, right? And he's generally like well-known. And next thing you know, the Super Bowl just so happens to fall around the same time. I think that's more of a fortunate coincidence than anything. Because, I mean, I don't know how long they've been dating. And it could be marketing for everybody involved. I don't think it is. But again, there's a huge financial incentive there. So think like who's making money, I would say.
And that's the thing. Because I would disagree. I don't know about whether these things are set up.
Right.
But if they're amplified.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, let's spot the opportunity to like, I think about it as a body, you know? So say, yeah, the Bush stuff's going on and that's represented with like a broken arm.
Right.
Well, to distract from the broken arm, we're going to twist your ankle as well. So you don't feel that as much. Yeah. You don't focus as much on this. So it's like, okay, something happens. All right, let's pump that up. Pump up the news on that, the coverage, like, and that's very easy to do. This entire thing is so easy to manipulate, so intentional. I think it's all, and again, not in a bad way. Like if you notice this, which is where I get disturbed in my own head, it's like, look at the commercials today. Like we're going to transition. I believe this, and people will say that it sounds crazy. We're going to transition to this like interdimensional world where different entities, and again, the Congress stuff with non-human intelligence, the movie winning the Oscars, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Right. Like that entire movie is about this interdimensional, you know, all this stuff. Think about the people who are on Joe Rogan, you know, all of these things. Even if you see commercials today, there's a new Netflix, The Three Body Problem. The commercials today about like what we're going to be able to do in space. All of this stuff is intentional. Like it's all the same thing. It's getting these ideas ready, getting people ready for these changes. Because instead of saying tomorrow, oh, we can travel different dimensions, people will be freaked the fuck out.
Right.
But if you slowly get the message across over different types of mediums, like these conversations, movies, commercials, there's the ideas are slowly dripped into your head, and then it kind of like conceptually makes more sense. Oh, people are able to connect dots a little bit more easily.
Well, one thing I want to say is, and this isn't just you, but everybody always says the word they, right? They are doing X, right? Who is they? That's the first question everybody should be asking when they hear a conspiracy theory is, who is the they? So when Alex Jones goes on Joe Rogan and is like, they are doing this and they are doing that, who is they? Right? He never really specifies who. And when he's kind of confronted on it, he has like this very vague answer of like intelligence agencies. It's like, well, but who? Like what department? Like what is the motive here? He's super vague. And the idea is that if it's super vague, it's a lot less easy to convince somebody of it because there's a lot less proof that is necessary. So when when people are vague with conspiracy theories and they're saying, you know, that the government is doing this or that Hollywood is doing this, but who? Like who specifically is doing this? Who is being incentivized to do this? If there's no benefit, it's probably not happening. So when it comes to like aliens, for example, which there's a guy I had on my show. And I was talking to him about this. I'm like, what about aliens, bro? And he's like, I didn't ask him like on the show, but it was on the back end. And I'm like, look, like, why are all these experiences happening where the government's like seeing these things and like aliens aren't public? And it's like, well, so what if there are aliens basically? Like, so what's your point? Like, you know, the government's not going to come out and say like, hey, everybody, there's other life, because there would be like a total like societal downfall. So, but the point though, with like the slow introduction, I understand where you're coming from, but I think it has more to do with conformity. I think it has to do with the idea that think about, here's a good example, Rosa Parks, right? So I remember my 6th grade social studies teacher put this really well. He was teaching us about Rosa Parks and how that all went down. She does this, and then, you know, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the story, but she does it, and then people start protesting the bus companies, right? And people are boycotting. And he's like, as much as we would all like to think that the bus companies did something after this big public outcry, they did not do something until they stopped making money and people stopped riding on their buses. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's so when there's this huge financial support for a movement, right or left or independent, on any level, it will happen, right? Like it will then become the norm, right? The movement, whatever that movement is, again, right or left, if enough companies sit there and say, you know, okay, well, this is very popular, let's make money off this. That's what's going to happen. And that's what gets promoted. And again, on any side, like Dana White, for example, he knows exactly who his audience is. That's why he pans to Trump sometimes, right? He knows that a lot of his audience are probably people that support Trump, right? Do I know that for a fact? Kind of, yeah. I mean, also, too, he's his best friend. So, like, that's an example. Or he knows that a lot of people that watch are like YouTubers, and he knows that YouTuber fighting is a big thing. So is it a coincidence that he's also friends with a lot of YouTubers? Not really. Yeah. No. Like, is it... It's calculated. I also like Dana. I will say that. I think I actually knew somebody that knew him before he was a billionaire. Back when he was doing like personal fitness training for like $20 an hour. Huh. Overall, super cool guy. He doesn't really care too much about money. Funny enough, like he doesn't make everything in his life about money. Overall, awesome guy. But
I don't know if a lot of those people really do. Bezos. I think they're searching for something within themselves that money will never. It's a hole that money will never heal.
Well, Dana, I think. Well, sometimes it's just passionate people. Like Elon Musk, for example. I have other like personal thoughts on Elon. I like the guy for the most part. I think what he's doing is good, but a lot of his endeavors have to do with very personal curiosity of like, how can we do this and how can we know that? Yeah. Less than it is about like, how can we just make more money? Warren Buffett is the definition of a guy that just sits there all day and is like, how can I make more money? Would I want his job? Hell no. Like, would I want to sit on a terminal all day and trade stocks and just look at numbers? No. Absolutely not. That sounds like an utter hell to me. Even if I am like one of the richest men in the world, and he doesn't even spend his money well. It's not like he's doing this so he can spend his money however he wants. So then you get a guy like Bezos, who's not very public, who, you know, he's also on the board of directors for the Pentagon. Most people don't know that. If you look it up, he has like a he has like
that was like a thing.
Yeah, no, he has like $100 million contract with the CIA too. What that is, I don't know. Yeah. But
so I think that when people say they, I think they're talking about the system and set up like that.
Well, again, who is the system though?
But that's all right. So that was gonna be my next question is like, I have this belief that we're all one. Like I believe in this oneness of your reality is constructed by your perception, which can change and it can also be wrong. And I, through experiences, have understood it. I had a very funny example the other night. Bro, I went to a bar to meet up with a couple friends, and this guy walked in. Right. Phillies hat. A little bit of a scruffy beard. Right. Shaggy hair. Looked exactly like Bryce Harper. And I didn't have my glasses on. I thought this guy was Bryce Harper. Like, the bar went silent, too, as soon as he walked in. Like, I think a couple other people were like, is that Bryce Harper? And I was like, in my eyes, like, I saw Bryce Harper. In my head. Right. You know, it's like, and like that can happen when you, again, your assumption, you could see somebody who kind of looks like Bryce Harper, but your brain is tricking you into saying like, no, that is Bryce Harper. Right. That's what's happening. Or you can hear something. Like there's all those different, you know, things online that we could pull up or put in here actually, where it's like, if you I think it's called priming. If you say to like, all right, there's this noise and you're going to hear this word, or when you look at this word, you're going to hear that word.
Yanny Laurel is, or not, there's a really good video that does that. You know, Ben 10? The show Ben 10?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I'm surprised. It was really popular when I was a kid, but Ben 10 doesn't really matter what the plot of the show is. He has this thing called an Omnitrix, which is like something you wear on your wrist. It's basically just a super fancy alien watch that he has. Don't worry about it. But McDonald's sold a toy. And I actually had the toy, funny enough. I don't know if it was McDonald's or I just bought it, but you would basically put an alien on it, like the little figure, and it would like say the name of that alien, and like that was a pretty cool feature. But the thing is, the alien's name is Brainstorm, right? And you put it on your wrist, and like it says a name like Brainstorm. But there's a video that if you hear if you think about the words green needle or brainstorm, you can hear one of the two. And it will sound exactly like a green needle or a brainstorm. And his name is Brainstorm. So what's going on here? That's perspective is definitely interesting though.
And that like multiply that by 100 levels and think about the perception of reality of the government.
Right.
If you want to like these QAnon people and whatnot, if you want to see all those things, you will see them. Like your brain will I don't want to say trick you into, but like, yes, if you want to focus on all the evil in the world, you will see more evil.
I call it the red car phenomenon. If I tell you, I'm like, did you know that statistically red cars are like, whatever statistic, they're 50% faster or whatever. Or even if I say there's 50% more red cars in the world than there are of any other type of car, you go, that's interesting. And you ask why? I don't know. But then all of a sudden you're walking down the street, red car here, red car there, red car. Or if Theo Von and Tony Robbins at an interview, it's a good episode, but Tony Robbins basically says to him, he's like, close your eyes or he goes, look at everything brown in this room, or in this case, look at everything black in this room, and then close your eyes and then like tell it back to me. And he could tell you everything black. And he's like, no, or he doesn't say, he doesn't say tell everything that's black. He goes, name something red. He immediately goes, name something red after he tells him to think of everything that's black in the room, or everything that's brown or white or whatever. And he can't do it. He's like, so whatever you're thinking about can just blind you to basically everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a pretty cool thing. Like it's cool in one way, but it's a very double-edged sword.
And that's the other thing is like, that's again, with the they and the system and all that stuff. It's like, well, do you want people to focus on the war at this point? And maybe at a certain point you do, so that you can get the money, and the attention and the cause, and to get people protesting and this and that. But then that kind of runs out, and then you need them to focus on something else, and you need to show them something else in order to do that.
Well, I think that has more to do with the media than does the government, because I mean, there's definitely.
Do you not think that they're like hand in hand at this point?
Well, to some extent.
Like I think but isn't that?
Yeah.
Not even like, and I don't take a ton of stands, but like intelligence agencies are obviously involved with Twitter, and the emails,
or they were at the very least.
Yeah, they were. Until
Musk bought it. Yeah, allegedly.
Yeah, exactly. But the same thing, like the news and all that kind of stuff. Like it's like, and even again with Hollywood, like to me, it's so obvious, and it's potentially for our own good. I try to look at everything positively,
right?
Because I want my life to be, I want to see more positive, which can be a good and bad thing at times.
Right.
You don't want to be overly positive and think that everything's rainbows and flowers, because fucking people are dying. At the same time. So like you gotta stay attached to reality at a certain level. But yeah, you can see any of that stuff.
Right.
You can see it one way or another.
Well, I don't like to think that it's like to the extreme of everything is controlled and every little move is like this and that. Cause I hate those conspiracy theories and this is why I really don't like it. It's like conspiracy theories that are like, everybody, the 3-letter crime agencies. And it's like, well, no, look, I think that for the most part, the CIA is probably a good agency. I've met people that have worked there, multiple, and I'm like decent friends with some of them. And I've met people that currently work there, and they're all interesting, cool people. And for the most part, they do good things, and they've told me about it. However, are there things that are bad that the agency does that they've even told me, like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that? It's like, yeah, absolutely. But that's with any system of government, though. But with the government and the media, though, to think that everybody's in this cabal with each other, it's like, well, no. It's like certain people like others and like have business dealings and mutual interests. And when interests, I think George Carlin had a really good quote. When mutual interests align, there's no need for a formal conspiracy. So you don't need this big idea of, all these people are getting together and they're, planning out this thing or that thing. It's like, well, no, not really. That's not really necessarily what's happening. It's not all these people. It's more like maybe the big players or the people that you don't even know the name of. So when people are formulating these conspiracy theories about famous people, like who knew the name of, and I hate talking about this guy too, but Jeffrey Epstein, like who knew his name before he got arrested? Nobody. And after he killed himself, right? So, my point is that I feel like conspiracy theories are kind of a waste of time because in a way, there's really nothing people can do to like help it. in a way. There's not nothing people can do, but there's really no course of action that being angry will change. Number one, thinking about it will not change it. And also, two, a lot of it is kind of based on this idea of just everybody agreeing with each other, saying, yeah, you know what, I think that guy sucks too. And I think that guy sucks too. So therefore, this conspiracy theory about him must be true. And it's like, well, no, like think about this a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know,
and there's good and bad within everybody. And it's funny because conspiracy theories,
they reduce people. They oversimplify people for sure.
Yes. And also, and I have to admit, because I enjoy reading about a lot of them. Like there's the craziest shit in the world. And it's so fun. But like to me, it's like, it keeps my brain malleable, open to ideas. If you say the most ridiculous thing in the world, and I completely disagree, the fact that you're a human being who has a life experience that led you to believe that interests me.
Right.
And again, as we talked about, kind of like the idea of the podcast and different styles, like my style, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get away from it, is interest in people and why they are the way they are. Everything that you're saying, I'm constantly thinking, I probably haven't asked good enough questions, but like how you got to be this way.
Right.
And that's the
person.
Yeah. Let's take a turn. Let's take a quick time out and then we'll hop back on and get into like, where all this stuff started in your head.
All right. Sounds good.
People Talking Sitting Down podcast, episode 19, coffee ad, take one.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for checking out the episode. George, thanks so much for doing this. Had a great time hanging out with you. But support the podcast. We just, a couple episodes ago, partnered with Drip Coffee. Drip Coffee is a local South Philly brewer. They make the beans right here in Philly. And we've got the Positivity Blend, which is a toffee, milk chocolate, and smooth medium roast. So please support the podcast. Check out the link in the description. Different ways to support. Buying one of these sweatshirts, buying a couple hats. They've got unbelievable gear up there. Shout out Carson for designing them. But guys, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, here's the rest of the episode. Thanks, George.
First cup of coffee in forever. That's what you said. Which is the sponsor of this episode.
So good. Yeah. Drip Coffee. We've got our part. It's not launched yet, but by the time this is out, it will be. But Blaze, Connor, and Sal over at Drip Coffee have partnered up with us on this bag, and we're pumped to get it out there because it's our first. Everyone always asks, like, "Oh, you making any money?" No. All it does is cost us money. Like we both.
Oh, I know the feeling. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah. I don't. Well, the only thing I pay for is Google Premium. So like I don't buy like everything out of pocket. My show doesn't require that much production. But I have thought about renting out a place in New York City though, like every once in a while.
Yeah,
like for a couple hours.
I was gonna say my suggestion, and not that you asked for it, but in person is just the best. Like I don't know if you do it at your parents, like in a basement or something like that, like Julian did.
Well, I can't do it in a basement, but I my plan. I've been thinking about this because there's somebody I've kind of been talking to. We might like do a joint podcast. I don't know. Nice. I don't want to put it out there because like, you know, I don't know how it happens, but I was thinking, I'm like, we could do virtual interviews, but I thought to myself, I haven't even brought the idea to him. I haven't even brought the idea to him yet, but I was thinking about renting a studio in New York for like, and I looked at the prices and they're like $50 an hour. And they're like a couch like this, and like there's just two, you know, mics or whatever. I'm like, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I don't know if there's a couch and a chair. Like you have a very unique setup. But we were talking about mental health. So I was gonna say there's politician terms, which is some my English teacher coined. And also actually I don't think she coined it. I think it was from Shawshank Redemption. I was gonna say Red Dead Redemption, but that's a very different thing. Shawshank Redemption. Something called politician words. I think that's what Red talks about when he's talking about, you know, like how the prison system works. It's a lot of politician terms. So when people say we need greater mental health for X, Y, and Z for prisoners, we need greater mental health for prisoners. Like, what does that mean? Like, when you say mental health, when people say mental health, everyone like raises their hand and they're like, "This is awesome. That's great." But everybody then kind of doesn't know what that means. Like, what does it mean to look like to be, not just to look like, I should correct myself, to be a mentally well person, right? Or what does mental health really entail? You know, when people think about it, they think of like meditating or like working out in some cases, or stress management. But I think, you know, like so a big part of that is also like knowing who you are, right? Like, and knowing kind of like what drives you, you know, and what your tastes are for certain things. Like Richard Branson, the billionaire. So he made this idea, and it's like a Japanese idea called ikigai that relates to it. But it's the idea that, I heard this from Mark Laita, who talked about it. But if you make a list of 4 things you love, 4 things you hate, 4 things you're really good at, and then 4 things you're really bad at, you're going to find somewhere in the middle of all that what you should be doing, what you want to do with your life. And like guidance, you will find guidance in that list. I don't know if it's 4 or if it's 5 or 1 or 2 or 3. It doesn't matter. And ikigai is the same thing of like, how can you make it's more specific though. It's a Venn diagram of like, what am I good at? What am I bad at? Or not what am I bad at, but it's more positively influenced. But it's like, what can I make money off of? And what gives me fulfillment? Like, what gives me this? Like, what gives me joy in my life? And then like, that's a great way to live your life. Both of those things. Richard Branson's like something anybody can do, but and both of them are things anybody can do. But I'll let you talk. Yeah.
No, it's just and we again tying this back into like at the break we were just talking about a little bit about conversations and how to interweave, because like we brand this podcast as a men's mental health podcast, but we've like unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately, naturally have gotten away from like talking about that the entire time, because I don't think it's, again, as we talked about entertainment, infotainment as well. How many times can we talk about meditation?
Right.
Like how many times can we say like
how deep can you go?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, look, I know we all like at the end of the day, like we know the right things that we have to do to like make ourselves mentally better. Right. We know, again, it's looking within yourself. But I think the best way to do that is to have these deep conversations where somebody, shout out my boy Nettie, we always, would kind of post game when an episode comes out, and I'd like hear all of his thoughts, and it's lovely to like, and it's amazing to hear what resonates with him, because what resonates with him might not resonate with somebody else, or might not, so it's like, just if people can pick up 1 or 2 things that will make them, like I relate to that. I think we're like, that is what the best way that we can do this is like providing perspectives from people that others can relate to make themselves feel not alone.
Right.
So that, again, like when we were talking about trying to fit in or conformity, it's like, oh, okay, like there's all these different people and they go through these different things and it's cool. And if it's just for one person, it's just for one person. And I would rather, or not, I don't want to say prefer the, like how this lands. Like, I just want people to be able to relate to 1 or 2 things. So if it's one person, 5 people, 100 people, one person's great. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like making an impact on one person is, it's sick. But yeah, we were just talking about like, sometimes during these conversations, I feel uncomfortable where it's like, I feel like I have to force the mental health topic.
Right.
Of like, oh, like what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you?
How do you maneuver it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, at the end of the day, but then you started going off when we were in the break about this prison stuff. And like, I was like, yeah, let's throw the headphones back on because I could tell you got some good takes on it. But just like you said at the prison stuff, like, oh, we got to fix this. We got to fix this. We got to fix this. Same thing with education.
But what does it mean? Yeah. That's what I'm getting at, right? It's always, not to cut you off, it's just like, I always, again, the media and TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, everybody likes to report these really grandiose ideas that this thing is happening, this thing is happening, this thing is happening. And it's kind of like a steamroller to your face. Like, it's like coming and coming and coming. And it's like, it's a lot because everybody's telling you like, it's this thing, it's that thing. And everyone's like telling you this statistic about how bad the prison system is. And I don't think anybody's sitting there saying the prison system is great and we should keep doing what we were doing. And everybody agrees it's bad, but like everyone's like, yeah. And same thing with men's mental health. Like everybody, or veterans' mental health. I'm more like well-versed in, but like when I ask people like that are veterans, I'm like, and some of them like run for government too. Right, that I've met, like they'll run for Congress eventually. But the thing that I ask a lot of these Navy SEALs is like, if you were in the government, if you were like the king of the government or whatever, if you were the president, what would you want to see change? If you could change it immediately, and they're like, well, 1 in 22 veterans commit suicide. I think just 1 in 22 veterans commit suicide. But then they'll say like we need better mental health for veterans and stuff. But then I don't want to be rude to them, obviously. Like, and I'm not trying to be when I say this, but it's like, what does that really mean? Like, what do you mean when you say mental health? Like, everybody agrees that and the veteran system is terrible, and then prison system is terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. What is the solution? And I mean, it frustrates me because everyone's complaining about the problem and not looking at, okay, well, what are we trying to do to fix this? Right? Like, how can we actually fix the problem? Who, not necessarily, or not even who, but like how, just the question of how. Nobody gets specific, and nobody really seems to go down that path of like, how can we really fix this? You know, who is the guy that we need to look for to fix this? You know, and everyone will kind of like look to two sides that they kind of don't agree with, that they already don't like either option they're given, and they'll vote for one or the other, which is what we're seeing now, for example. But yeah.
How do you think that we do fix it? You have any ideas?
Like for what system specifically? Mental health, or
even just for the veterans?
Okay, veterans, I would say that I don't know all their benefits, but I think that therapy, for example, of any kind, or not of any kind, but there should be some type of like an insurance for that. Like veterans afterwards should be like get a full expenses paid on like medical health, for example, because that's a very big issue. Like, you know, because a lot of them get a lot of injuries or just suffer from PTSD, but also too, a lot of them. This was a really interesting conversation I had with he was a former CIA guy. Who I also had on the show, and I asked him about like veteran suicides, or I don't know how we got on the topic, but he's like, you wouldn't know. It's like, he's like, how as a crazy person would you know that you're a crazy person? And I know, like, I don't like to use that term because it's like such a vague term as well, but there was like a guy he even knew that like he was with his wife and kids, and everything was fine, and then he just walks out and he shoots himself in the head. Why? I don't know. And I guess we'll never know. But the point that he was trying to make with that is like a lot of these guys, when it comes to mental health, veterans, the reason that they don't seek it out is because they don't want to get their guns taken away. Like that sounds like a very like, and that's something that nobody says. It's like, well, veterans don't want to seek out mental health because if you're a veteran, I mean, just look at like Ruby Ridge, for example, where it's like, that's like a massive hour-long topic there. But you know, the FBI basically just hears, you know, veteran.
What's Ruby Ridge? I don't know.
It's a super long story.
What's like the too long didn't read? Like what's the
2-minute like version would be FBI, I think ATF 2 basically busts down this veteran's door, and he's in the middle of the woods, and he's with his family, and basically unjustly kills him and his family, and like puts him in a position where he's like super panicked. I like, it's like way too long to get into like all the specifics, because if you look up a video on it, it's not gonna be like 20 minutes, it's gonna be like an hour, right? It's just so long. So not to get into that because that's like a whole nother topic. But the point is, when people, for example, that are in the government, they hear like mental health, veteran, and he has a gun. It's like, well, you know, you kind of want to take that guy's gun away because you don't trust him with it. And I don't blame the, you know, people in the government for doing that. That's their job, is to, you know, make sure, okay, is this guy really someone that should be holding a gun? Well, it's like, number one, how do you go about taking that away from him? And number two, if you do that, like, what does that mean, basically? What does it mean to care for someone mentally? So they're basically deemed a crazy person in the eyes of the government, which is a very big problem. But at the same time, if, you know, the one guy that is that way and that really does have something wrong with him goes out and he kills himself or a bunch of people or he hurts somebody, who's really to blame there? So it's kind of this battle of like, how do we build trust between these two organizations? I think because one is in fear of the person, the other is in fear of the organization and what they could lose. So I think trust, yeah.
That's a phenomenal take. And I've never heard about that as far as like the veterans go, because they don't want their guns taken away. That makes a lot of sense.
Or their family or anything, or their employers. Yeah. And I appreciate the compliment. But I was just, it's just people don't like think, you know, what is this person going to lose? Like, because everyone's asking, like, why don't they just go to therapy? Like, well, why didn't that person just deal with their mental health? It's like, well, it's not that they didn't, and it's not that people didn't care. It's just that there was some lack of something, some lack of communication usually is what it is. It's usually some lack of trust or communication. I think that's what it really boils down to. I don't think it's this super complicated issue of like, oh, and we need to do this and that. It's like, no, look, how can we build trust between the government and veterans?
I wonder, yeah, that's a good idea. I wonder if you could take getting both parties to agree, where it's like, all right, you don't have to give up your guns forever,
right?
But as you're seeking out this help, and because you're doing that, because you're giving us something up, we're going to give something to you,
right?
Where it's like, if you give up your guns, it's all free. Or if you give up your guns, it's all not even free, like incentivized to like a program where you're getting paid to. You get essentially getting paid to rehab yourself, just like when you get injured in sports leagues. You're still getting paid to rehab because we need you at a certain level.
Well, I think it should be temporary. I think that it's like for however long. That's how I would do it. Is like, look, if you're going to be seeking out this mental health treatment for 3 months, we will give your gun back like immediately as soon as those 3 months are up. Are there times when that system's going to be broken? Yes. But is it also a hell of a lot better than like, because just think about it like this. Veteran has a gun, is dealing with mental health issues. You're somebody that's going to go to that door and like if you get that report, right? Or if that person confides in somebody else, like, man, I'm really struggling with this. Unless if it's a close friend who kind of understands, it's a very, very problematic thing to deal with. Like, because how do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with someone that knows how to hurt people, and including themselves, and has the access to do so, and also might be in the state to do so? So I think there's a lot that could go into that, but I think if there was just some degree of like a system where, temporarily the guy can give his guns for a bit, like in a holding spot, almost like a safety deposit box that only like a certain person would have a key to. He does that. And then in return, he gets like treatment for however long he needs. But then it's also the question of, but where that system would fail, I think, would be like, okay, well, how do you deem if a person is well again? Number one. Number two, even if you do deem that he's well, what happens if they don't think that you're ready yet? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of and then it becomes problematic of like, well, who decides what? It's like too vague, and there needs to be like stricter guidelines. Because when things get vague, things become problematic. I notice.
Yeah. I wonder if getting either, I don't know, like say, I'm interested in like the 12-step program because it's one of the most effective organizations I've ever seen from like my perspective. One of the largest organizations in the world. And I think one of the best things there is like having a sponsor. So what if you have a sponsor as a veteran that's in the veteran community that's just older than you and has dealt with the therapy, and that he's like, he or she signs off on you getting your gun back, and then so does a spouse. So you pick like one person who's most important to your life that you essentially all agree. Like if you think, and this is funny that I'm thinking about this with like blockchain technology, but with blockchain, like you have to have certain keys that like, all right, if it's decentralized and all three people put in their keys, then it opens up. It's like that kind of thing where it's like, all right, how do we do it? Because I love that you're thinking about it in this other way, because your answer was very different than the answer that was in my head, which again, it's talking about these things in the reality that they are.
Right.
What PTSD is, from my perspective, everyone always asks, like, if it's like, oh, were you a veteran? No, I wasn't. But like, I know, and not to the level that a lot of these guys go through, in a different type of way.
Yeah.
But what PTSD is, their body thinks it's in the past. So like, we're talking about this interdimensional type stuff.
Yeah.
If you're just thinking about the like life being a straight line, when they hear a bang, their body is still back here.
Right.
So they're reacting, their mind, like, and that's the thing is like, what they're seeing, they're not crazy. They're literally seeing that. Like that's real to them.
Yeah.
And telling these people, instead of like, oh no, you're not, like, I think approaching it in a more, okay, here's what's happening. You're seeing this because this has happened in your life, and that sound, and people not, because again, like you're saying, people knocking on your door.
With guns.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Where do you think that puts them back to?
Yeah. There's a good movie called Brothers. Have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't seen like any movies.
It's all right, bro. Yeah. I don't necessarily watch movies. I don't know. I've always watched like summaries, and like I understand. I'm very good at understanding like the summary of a movie and the idea of it. So the idea of Brothers is basically this guy who dies. I'm using air quotes for a reason there, because he dies supposedly in a war. I think it's the Middle East. I think it's the Middle East, whatever. He dies, and then his wife is like, oh, this is like, it's obviously upset. So then she basically starts to get into a romantic relationship with his brother, right? But then it turns out the guy is not dead, right? So then he comes back home to then realize that his brother and his wife are in this romantic relationship. It's just like really, 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 it's also a really good movie because like Tobey Maguire is the veteran, and he's like, he does it super well. Like he like looks through people and he doesn't just look at them. If you notice in the movie, he's really good at depicting it. And when you're watching like the scenes where he's getting angry, you can like feel it, right? Like it feels like a very real movie. But anyways, in the movie, he goes on this like breakdown, and it's very obvious that Toby, I don't know the guy's name, so I'm just going to call him Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire is on Toby, whoever the guy's name is unwell, right? And then eventually his brother comes in and he's like, look, we're going to get through this. So what he does is he has, I think he called the police like prior to his, it's Jake Gyllenhaal, by the way, that plays Toby's brother. But so Jake Gyllenhaal calls the police, I think, or the wife calls the police on Toby, and Jake is basically holding Toby, and then he hears the police sirens and sees them outside, and he's like, oh, you effing this and that, you called the cops, like I can't, and like he's going ballistic, and then eventually he walks outside of the house and he like starts trying to commit suicide. But the point that I'm trying to make there is to threaten a veteran who is going through something, right, who granted might be a harm to themselves or other people. Police are not meant to deal with mental health situations, right? And I think I had a professor on, he's also a retired detective, but like you have to know how to make conversation. Like these guys are just like approaching this guy with a gun. They don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
So they're very panicked. And this guy is just super frustrated and he's willing to die, presumably considering that he's holding a gun to his head. And, because I would be upset too if my wife moved on and did that. But point is, regardless of the movie, that's a very real scenario, is that, some guy's just showing up at your door and just saying, all right, we're going to put you in handcuffs and we're going to throw you in jail. Like that's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to. And if they do put you in a mental health place, you could be with people that are much, 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 much more unwell than you are, because they don't really know where to put you. They just know that one scenario. They don't know how unwell you actually are. And it's very hard to test that. So I think like being clear and specific instead of just like, and like having training of like what to do when, that's very important. And creating systems that better build trust and like these less anxious scenarios when, confronted. Because when people get confronted, they get very like backed into a corner and they start acting like they go like primal instincts of like doing certain things and repeating certain things. So yeah, I know it's a long-winded way of saying just we have to figure out a way to build trust between whoever is trying to fix the problem and who or what or where the problem is coming from.
Yeah.
Usually the person. We have to build that trust between the individual and the organization or person trying to help. And
I almost think that defining it as like you said the person, but almost the experience.
Right.
Because it's not the person's fault that they were in a situation where they lost their best friend,
right.
and in an attack.
Right.
It's not the person, like it's like the experience, and that's just life, unfortunately. Like that is what like life fucking smacks you in the face sometimes, and it is what it is. And it's just understanding that it's like, I think we're so getting off, and this isn't even conspiracy, this is just the way that I'm starting to think about the world, like in a much more spiritual sense. Right. Like you have this body that can operate on autopilot. Like I caught myself when I was driving the other day, like I was distracted, admittedly. I shouldn't be texting and driving, but I was distracted, and like I looked up, I think it was like actually listening to a podcast too. So I was like in the conversation, like I wasn't, like I was driving, I had, like even when I was listening to the conversation, I wasn't being aware of the road, but
as much as you should have been. Yes.
Yeah. But on the highway, but my body knows how to drive. My body knows, okay, if somebody cuts in your lane, hit the brake, and it snaps back into that. It's like system 1, system 2 type, brain, whatever.
The different modes.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's like your body has this ability to go on autopilot essentially. But then there's also this like creative side where it's like, I think your soul comes out and is able to be like a higher, like people say like higher self, lower self.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the complexities of all of it.
Yeah. And you shouldn't concern yourself with it either. It doesn't really mean anything. That's like another vague term. But
yeah. That's a good point. I think there's a realness to it though at the same time. You know, I think that we know what we're doing when we're at our best. We know who we really truly are. And at the same time, like we talked about earlier, hiding those parts of yourself is what gets people into trouble.
Yeah. Well, hiding or manipulating parts of yourself.
Wow. Expand on that. Cause that's
so
beautiful.
Like, again, like that could be, you know, again, the chocolate ice cream example is like the best example I'd give to someone with conformity, which is, you know, you like chocolate ice cream. Your friends are like, that sucks. It tastes bad. And sometimes they'll even say, whoever thinks that it's good is like stupid, right? Let's just say. But, you know, manipulating yourself to convince yourself that you like something, right? Like, it's not just like, you know, you don't like it, but you're doing it because of this person. Some people don't even know that they're doing that because they've done it for so long. And then eventually it's just like, you're manipulating yourself into saying like, and you get really good at it. Like some people get really, really good at it where they're just like all the time, it's just like this image of like this thing or that thing. And they don't really know who they are. Right. Like, and there's plenty of celebrities like that. I haven't met anybody like that. But like people are different, like in different scenarios too. Like, this isn't like manipulating yourself, but like, again, like for example, when I met Julian in person, he seemed like very like focused, number one, but he also seemed very like quiet, like not quiet, but he just seemed like very like on what he was doing, like very wired, like very focused. Not wired. Wired's not the right word because it's like wired, you'd be like, oh, I'll get away from me. But like he's just very focused on what he's doing, right? And you can feel it when you're there. But with him too, I noticed that like off the podcast, he's a little bit more like quiet. Like he's like not trying to make as much conversation, but he'll ask you stuff. But he's more of just like, okay, yeah, like what do you, yeah, all right, yeah, and what about this? Like, but on the show, he's like a little bit more upbeat. I've noticed like he's not afraid to get a little bit like, you know, louder and laugh a little bit more. I notice, and I don't think he's trying to do that. I think that's just the way he is, maybe like because like I do that too. But yeah, like back to my point with manipulating yourself, I think it's like when you start to convince yourself of things that aren't true, when you start gaslighting yourself and saying like, oh, well, I do like this. And you start telling yourself over and over again, and you know it's not true. And that cognitive dissonance is the term. When that's like never resolved, that's when it's like problematic because then it's like you don't know what you actually do like.
And can you define cognitive dissonance?
Cognitive dissonance just means any time you have an action that does not agree with what your brain wants or knows that you want. So I don't know, like no, I do know. So take an example of like guy who doesn't like to runs, right? Like I used to hate running. But then like lost a bunch of weight and I started running, but like I still hated it. Like I still hated when it got hard. So, and I also have like terrible cardio naturally, but when I run though, it's like for the first part, I was like, oh, this sucks. Like I hate this so much. Like, and like eventually you start running enough and your body gets good at it too. But like, how do you convince yourself to push yourself? Like, it's just the idea of pushing yourself and like and against something that does not want to be pushed, right? Like, how do you push is the question, but cognitive dissonance, to answer your question, that's just pushing. It's just when your brain and usually your body are pushing against each other, or when one thing exists in your brain already and you try to introduce something that's completely different to it and by an action or a thought process.
So as you're saying that, like, and that's something I think about often is because personally, when you dive into yourself, and especially this comes a lot in like meditating, like you know the answers, you know what sits inside your core. You just got to look at it. And I think we're all, I guess I'll just speak from personal experience and society at large too. But like, it's scary when you do that. Right. When you realize that you have things within you, you know what I mean, that are like, that are scary to face.
Well, you have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
100, because like, I mean, I'm a big proponent of the idea that, you know, you don't need to lie. Like, lying is for short-term wins, but if like, for me, it's just like, I try to tell the truth as much as I can. Like, just be a good person as much as I can. But just telling the truth is a very, very, very healthy thing. Go on. Yeah.
Because it again, lying distorts your own reality.
Right.
Like, because then you're lying to yourself, you're lying to others, you're lying to everybody around you, and then you can't even trust yourself.
Right.
And that's
then you don't know yourself. Then you don't know what you like or don't like is the main one. But then you also don't know who or what or where and when and how. You don't know who you are. Like, because like people always like to talk to them like, what's the first most basic question you could ever ask on a date?
Who are you? What do you care about? What do you passionate about?
What's the most basic, the most like surface level question you could ask?
Oh God, you're asking the wrong guy about dating. Yeah.
What's your favorite color?
Okay. All right. That's where you're starting. Okay.
So it sounds like sounds like a funny answer, but it's the question that we're asked when we're kids. And we're asked like,
it's really funny.
So that's why I'm saying it's the most basic question.
Yeah.
But those little thing of like, and what's that movie called? Anger Management. Have you seen that?
No.
I watched the full movie. That's a really good movie. It's like it's with Adam Sandler and Jack Nicholson. It's really funny. But like the anger management guy, because the idea is that Adam Sandler gets arrested on a plane for anger management, even though he didn't do anything wrong. In the end, like his girlfriend set up the whole thing, but it's good. But during the actual anger management process or whatever, not process, but during the treatment or whatever, he asks Adam, Jack Nicholson asks Adam Sandler, he's like, "Who are you?" And that's like the most general question that you could ask. Yeah. It's like, tell us who you are. So then he starts off by saying like, well, I like to do this and I like to do that. And he's like, no, tell us who you are. Now, I think the movie got that wrong because I think what you like and what you like to do is an extremely very like essential person to your, what you like and what you don't like is essential to your personality, right? And essential to knowing who you are. So knowing what you like and knowing what you don't like is absolutely essential to like the question of who am I? Like, what do I want to do?
And like you said, back to conformity. Like you have to, if you disagree with people, that's kind of like a form of lying to yourself. Right. It's like if you keep saying that I'll do what everybody else is doing, or if I'll just go along with the crowd. God, it's fascinating. What do you think, back to like mental health type stuff, like what do you think is the way to approach it in the school system right now? Like, what do you think, again, do you think that these, like in practice, what's the right way to do it? Because even like thinking about the prison stuff where it's like, I hate to say this, be brash, but like, what's the point of even having the conversation on prison mental health?
If nothing gets done. And
not only if nothing gets done, but the way the system's set, like the system, whatever, the physical space of the system. All right, so you have people locked in a cage in concrete walls.
Right.
Their mental health isn't going to be good.
Right. And they're surrounded by people exactly like that. Yes. That did the exact same thing.
And they're feeding off these energy systems. Like, again, we talk about like being able to kind of come in here, feel comfortable.
But there's also no system of trust. That's a big one, is that in prison, there's a lot of fear because at any point you're going to get stabbed. And that's usually in state facilities, but I do know what you mean though.
Yeah. It's like, so why even have the conversation if they're only allowed outside for 1 hour? Like, it's not like thank you so much, Max. Now that I'm back on the coffee, I'm like, yeah, you're the man. Thank you.
But to answer your question though, about how it should be presented to kids, I think that it should be presented as it is, which is to say as seriously of a topic as it is, but also in a method that, so the key here is really just making kids care about it. So it's like anything in school, kids are like 75% of the time they don't care about it. I'm willing to bet, if not more. Mm-hmm. So like math class, I do it because I have to do it, but I don't care. Like, I'm not sitting there thinking about the Pythagorean theorem at night, right? I'm not like staying up all night obsessed with that, right? Some people do, and that's their thing. Good for them, but I don't care, right? It's not for me. I don't care in the sense of like not apathetic, but it's just like, I don't care because I shouldn't, right? I don't think I should. It's not for me. It doesn't interest me. So then you get like social studies, which I care a little bit more about, and English, which I care more about. learning because these are topics that interest me. But then you get mental health, which is a necessary topic, kind of like driver's ed, for example, that people don't pay attention even though they should. And it's not because the kids think that it's unnecessary. The kids know that it's necessary. They are very aware that it's a necessary topic. But the problem is, how do you make them care? And actually, I should correct myself too, because sometimes they don't know that it's necessary because the school is not presenting it in a way that kids are going to care. Mm-hmm. Kids are not sitting there during my class. And again, this is maybe just my class, but I've never had an experience where they're just like sitting there like really intrigued by the teacher and everyone's like asking these super thoughtful questions, even though it's a topic that people could go into a lot about. And it's because, you know, also the teachers are not really primed to teach that class. And I thought about this too, where I think there should be a course. I don't know if it should be your senior year, your junior year, whatever, but like later on in high school. And I've heard this before. I forgot where I've heard it, but I think it should just be called like life management or something like that. And for a year, for a semester, whatever, you have to take this course and it'll teach you every single thing that you need to know about being an adult. Right. So there will be like a week on taxes, right? Or like how to manage your finances, or like a month on how to manage your finances. That's like a super big topic. So that could go on for a while. But with mental health, though, I think that should be like its own subject matter of like, okay, if you feel X way, what are you supposed to do? Right. Because I don't think people understand that there's a lot of fear associated with being honest, like about their mental health. Right. And I don't mean fear in the sense of like, oh man, what is this guy going to think about me? Because I don't. Like, because that's part of it, like for sure. But
I think that's gone away actually a lot.
It is, but
which is cool.
Yeah,
because that's happened in like 5 years.
Right. That is and that's amazing. But the fear is also like with the veterans, for example. It's like, at what point does a thought become wrong? If that makes sense. Like, at what point does a thought become like you can't be with other people if you have that thought? Where it's like, take Sean Strickland, for example, who, mind you, watched his dad when he was in the 3rd grade. You know Sean's story, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Like, he would watch his dad strangle his mom at like when he was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and he would have to smash a guitar over his dad's head and run out and call the cops. Like, the most horrible stuff you can imagine. And he ended up as a UFC fighter, but he even admits that like that's like the best case scenario, and he's still a really violent person, like deeply violent, that he gets into fist fights and bar fights all the time, and clearly going to jail has not solved that. But my point with like the fear thing of, you know, with him, he's like, oh man, you know, fighting people is good. And like, to tell you the truth, a lot of men and a lot of people have had that thought of like, I want to fight this guy. I want to punch this guy in the face. And that's kind of a healthy thought, I think. Like, having a super angry feeling, like where you're about to have an outburst, is a very normal thing. And that's exactly how you should have, like, you should have that feeling sometimes, right? But you also have to know, number one, how to reel yourself in, but also how do we bring that in? Like, how do you talk to somebody about that? Because in a school, where if you're like saying to a teacher, hey, you know, I'm having thoughts about like punching people in the face, and like their first thought is just, okay, well, I have to report this to their guidance counselor, and then I have to tell their parents because the school wants to avoid liability. So then this kid gets in trouble basically, and the parents are like, well, why weren't you more honest? Like, did it? And like everyone's kind of yelling at the kid, like, why didn't you do this? Like, instead of just saying, okay, well, look, why do you think this? Like, what's a better solution? Like, how do we deal with this? Maybe get to the root of the problem. What is the problem? So I think it's just, again, building trust between an organization or a person. And it doesn't have to be an organization. I'm saying one person, and then like just that person and the other person, right? And those two people, that makes a difference. Because most people, when they get out of something very big or problematic, it's not like they had, you know, oh, this group of people that helped them. It's usually just one person that they helped, that was like, man, this guy helped me along the way, you know, or man, like this person died, but like, you know, my mom was, or my dad, or this guy was right by my side, or my cousin, or my whoever. And I don't care really who it is, but the question is, do you care? Does it mean something to you?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the problem with mental health, is that it's like, how do you get people to care, and care in the right ways? Because saying mental health over and over and over again, like for a lot of people, like that's kind of their solution to the problem, which isn't a solution at all. It's like, awareness is half the battle, but the other half is rarely ever fought.
Yeah.
You know?
Fuck yeah. That's such a good way to put it, because that's what the second half of the conversation, like you're saying, needs to be had, is like, how do we actually do these things? And as you were talking, I was thinking about, excuse me, like therapy. That's the one like for a lot of people can be the one person. Like you can go into therapy and say that you killed somebody.
Right.
They can't tell anybody. They're not allowed. Like you can tell them anything in the world.
Is that true?
Yeah. You're not allowed. That's the safety of therapy.
Huh.
They can't, I don't believe, and this is actually, I'm speaking out of turn because I'm not 100% sure. But like, I don't think that they can bring a therapist up on the stand and say like, oh, well, did he tell you that and like interrogate a therapist like that? Because that's the safety of it.
Well, that's what it should be at the very least.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's the thing is I think that, again, getting that point across where it's like, no, therapy. And I try to tell I've talked to a bunch of people about seeing a therapist or like what it's like. And it's like, that's one of my favorite parts. You can say anything.
Right.
The most real and insecure or scary things that like go through your head, you can talk about them.
Well,
and not be, and again, depending on the therapist, I'm very, very, very fortunate with mine, but like, it's a comfortability thing just to get that off your chest, because that's another thing.
Right.
Like
most people hold a lot of weight.
That's the thing is like, I wish I was smarter. I always say that now, but like, I wish I could talk about these things at a higher level. Those thoughts are stored in your body,
right?
If you're not dealing with them. So talk about grieving for an example.
Right.
Say, somebody had a parent that died and they never got those feelings out of like the pain, or they just kind of buried it. You bury those feelings and they get stored in your body,
right?
Instead of talking about them, and then they get outside of your body. So like ailments, like people don't talk about how interrelated like injuries are to like your mental health. It's your story, like it's manifesting in a certain way. Because if you're not going to deal with it, if you're not going to, again, and that's why people like even writing things out, you're getting it out of your head. And I can only say this because like I've experienced the feeling of like when you release something, like I've felt the brain.
Yeah,
change.
I know you mean.
Like you have to, and that's, as you were talking about emotions and different, feeling different things. Like you have to. What happens a lot, kind of relating to like Inside Out, the movie. Well, some people don't have, like you said about fighting somebody. That's a healthy thought.
Right.
Some people don't have the ability to get angry.
Right.
And that's not healthy.
Which is the inverse of somebody of like Sean Strickland, who's like angry all the time. Like,
yeah. And he doesn't have the ability to, like one of his other ones stunted. And that's why I always think about it in a visual levels kind of way, where it's like, not everyone's tank, say the 5 emotions or 5 feelings, whatever it is. Like they're not all going to be at 100. And if one's at 90, well, then one's going to be at 10, you know? And it's just, because they work against each other.
Right.
Whatever, joy and sadness. Like, it's like, whatever it is. Like, so which one, and I don't know. I when I started this podcast, I thought I had all the answers. And the one thing it taught me is that I don't at all. But the more conversations that you have, like, again, that insight about veterans specifically is a point that I did not think about at all. That could be driving that entire thing.
Right. Well, I mean, like, go on.
I was just going to say that's, I think that's all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's other examples of like, even, stuff with like athletes' mental health, with kids' mental health, with, I'm very fascinated by like good business leaders. It's like, okay, well, they have these things for a certain reason. And then another thing, random, but like that I've learned through these conversations, like a lot of people's biggest strengths can also be the biggest weakness.
Right.
Like a guy like Jim Diorio, he's an animal. He's a beast. Like he's like, I would not fuck with Jim Diorio, but that can also work against, and as he talked about in certain ways, like there's a balance, where there's a dark side, and that's I don't know. I'm trying to read about like Jungian shadows and different things like that, and understand psychology behind people. But again, I think that's the problem, is we don't talk about these things like that.
Right.
Because they sound a little crazy, or they sound a little far off, but.
Well, I think a big, I think a very big part of like all problems is how do we find the solution, and how specific can we get, right, with solving a problem? Because when people point to a politician, for example,
And this isn't a bad thing, funny enough. I don't think it is, because they are the ones who are supposed to solve problems. So, when people sit there and they say Joe Biden, for example, or, let's just say whatever problem it is, Joe Biden fixed this. What is he really supposed to do? Like, if people laid out this really specific idea and this really specific plan, and then they presented it and they said, okay, here is the solution that we as a group of people want. Or if senators, instead of, okay, like filibustering, for example, is it's just absurd. Like the fact that exists. like when my social studies teacher told me that if senators are people that are in Congress, they're legally allowed. He's like, if somebody wanted to, they could just take out a phone book and read names out of a phone book for an hour, and nobody has the right to stop them. And I think the longest one was 36 hours. But regardless, I think that when people get specific with the solutions, things get done. And there's a phenomenon where if there is an emergency, let's say you go into a restaurant, or let's just say downstairs, right? In your in the apartment complex, right? Somebody has a heart attack. The last thing you want to do is be put in a crowded position, right? I'm sorry. The last thing, if you're a person that's having a heart attack, and I learned psychology, the last thing you want to have happen is you're in a crowded room, because everybody's looking at each other and they're like, oh, nobody's doing anything, so therefore the situation's not important, right? Or people think to themselves, well, if somebody else is getting involved, I shouldn't get involved, because they deem it to be important. But the point is that if that happens, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to call somebody out by name, or be like, you in the blue shirt, or you in the black sweatshirt, come help this man, call 911, do this, do that. Don't just say call 911 somebody, because nobody feels the obligation. So when somebody says,
wow,
because what's happening there is you are giving a specific list of instructions. You are saying, do this now. You're giving them a time, and a specific person and a specific instruction. So if somebody says to you, for example, you black shirt, call 911, then you feel obligated. You're not going to stand there and be like, no, like who would do it? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, who would do that? If I were to be in a crowded room and I said, call 911 while somebody's having a heart attack, maybe somebody would, but if I point out you specifically and I say, you do this thing, you do this, that, and that, you will do it. So if we're talking about mental health, or we're talking about any problem in society, we have to be very specific with what we want, right? Like whatever that is and however that might look. So mental health, again, super general, which is why nothing gets really done about it. So when we say, therapists, for example, I think that, let's just say school therapists. Like if I say, I want there to be school therapists in every school. It's like, okay, well, be a little bit more specific now. Like, what type of person? What type of psychologist, right? Are we talking about school psychologist? Are we talking about a child psychologist? Things like that do matter, right? You have to be very specific. And also, what school? Middle school, maybe. High school, definitely. Everybody would agree on that. Elementary school, maybe, right? So you have to be very specific with what you want and how you want it to get done. You have to be very specific with what you think, right? How you feel about something, which is unfortunately why I think a lot of things don't get done. I mean, we can get into the argument of people are benefiting off of this and that. It's because also too, nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. If I was, let's just say, the senator of New Jersey, right? I mean, again, we can go really into depth about the corruption and whatever, and I've heard all about it, trust me. But actually, I'm the senator of New Jersey, right? Or the governor. What am I supposed to do to help mental health? If I'm in that position, how do I solve that problem? Think about how complicated of a task it is, right? So then you have to go to somebody that's thought about it, and the expert's going to kind of say what every other expert is saying. So that's not really giving you an answer. So it's okay, what should I really be doing? What do I think? And really thinking about it, what's a solution? How is a solution going to be effective? And just thinking out a plan and then presenting it and then having that plan, build into existence. I think that's a much more effective means than just to say mental health here, mental health there. So in terms of how to help people, you got to be very specific and very truthful, and there has to be a system of trust.
That's one of the probably best things I've heard this entire time doing this is like like what's tangible stuff that people can take from this. Like I've never heard of that in a crisis situation, which I was actually just like a year ago in a situation like that. A guy was choking at a restaurant.
Right.
And same thing, like, you know, he was with his daughter, I think.
And nobody was doing anything about it.
Well, she just screamed like, somebody call the cops. And like,
and everybody freezes.
yes, exactly. Cause it's like, what do you like again, me, what could I do? I don't know CPR, which like, I should work on that, but like, what can you do? What can everybody do? Unless there's somebody, and again, of course, there's like certain people, like my dad's a physical therapist, and there was a situation one time where, I don't know, I forget what happened, but like somebody needed help and he like sprinted it because like he's through his profession, like kind of has this understanding of like
the human body.
Yes. And somebody, or like, that kind of thing as a sensitivity to it. Right. You know, whether it be a car accident or a motorcycle or something like that. I forget what it was even, honestly. And maybe I forget if I was even there, but like, I really like that advice of you call the cops, you grab water, you do this. Cause like it's, you know, and that's the thing is there just needs to be one person who knows what to do in that situation.
And does it.
Yes.
That's the key. So again, let's just say somebody gets shot. Right. I mean, that's like a really extreme scenario. Or like, let's say, you know,
I've told this story before. I saw that. I saw somebody.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
It's crazy. I was up on like 22nd and Market, and this guy's limping, and he's in like, I forget what color the car is, whatever. He's limping. I thought it was a hit and run. So I kind of start like, again, trying to like, oh shit, like, is this guy okay? And so I jog over and he's like, call the cops. So I call the cops and I'm like, I'm at 22nd and Market. I think somebody just got like a hit and run. You know, send help, please. And as I'm saying that, the guy's pulling his pants down and he's bleeding everywhere.
Right.
So I thought like something like his knee, like a bone went through or something like that. Like I thought, you know,
stuff happened. Yeah.
I wasn't thinking guy got shot. I mean, like not a bad area. Like I just thought, you know, whatever. And the operator was like, oh, you mean the guy that got shot? And I'm like, what?
And somebody else called. Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody else had called, and then it was a chaotic situation because like the cops didn't honestly get there for like longer than I expected.
Like, yeah.
People were running up again. Somebody who knew what to do, like tied
tourniquet. Yes.
Yeah. Tourniquet. That's, I forgot that word. But I was just kind of like in shock in that situation. And I remember, you know, pretty specifically, like, it was just I don't know if destabilizing is the right way, but I didn't know what to do or think, or I was like, is this guy dying?
Right.
And it turned out that it was a road rage incident. He took a crowbar like minutes before that in like another part of town, took a crowbar to the back of somebody's windshield or their window or something like that. And she shot him in self-defense.
Right.
So then he tried to drive himself to the hospital and had to stop and get out because he was like, you know, he couldn't drive anymore.
Right.
So I just remember being like, you know, the whole situation, like nobody really knew what to do. And there was like, I just took a knee and started like this nurse who just happened to be walking by, like started like rubbing my back. Cause I think she could tell, like I was like in shock. Like I didn't know what to do.
I would be too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people around is like, people were just like, cause then they're like, the police come, they're taping it off. They're like, it's literally like, I felt like I was in a movie scene.
Right. It doesn't feel real.
Yeah. And it's just like, what? Like, but that lady doing that, like just I think that actually really helped my own
state,
processing of it, because I'll never forget, like thinking about going to bed that night.
Yeah.
Like 2 minutes after, I was like, am I going to sleep?
Yeah. It's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
In those situations, again, if we can get like information out there to like, all right, if you're in that situation, that's what you do. If you're in that situation, rubbing somebody's back really helps.
Yeah.
If you're in that situation, you know, what can you do to kind of, because that kind of situation, I've shared this with people. If you have a traumatic situation, the best thing to do is move.
Right.
Instead of having it soak down into your body.
And freeze. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I just like walked that whole night. Like I walked like 5 miles or something like that. Like I just, you know, trying to get anything, But again, those are the things like that. Like, what can we do about the mental health crisis? Well, we can get information across that like actually helps in those traumatic situations.
Well, with that, I actually have a similar story. So there was a guy. I told you about my uncle that died recently. I've had because again, my family's so big, but the one uncle that died recently, with him, it was such a shame because how he died and how my aunt found out about it. So my aunt found out in the worst possible way, which is, my uncle goes out to have dinner with his friends, and then all of a sudden the cops show up with like 20, not 20 cops, sorry. Like it was like 5 different cop cars and then like an ambulance shows up at the house, and they say, "Ma'am, we believe he lives here. Are you his wife? Your husband just passed." And she has like 2 kids, right? So and they're like both my age too, which is like what really sucks. But with regards to that, like how he died was either by a stroke or a heart attack. And because he was unhealthy for sure, but he was driving back, and I think he had a stroke or a heart attack, like, because I don't know which one it was, but either way he had this, and he basically had it at the wheel and he crashed. And I don't know if he died because of the crash, but it wasn't, I'm trying to think of like, there was so many people that like drove past it, and like just nobody called until it was, like I don't know how they even found out, but like nobody called immediately. It was just like, hey, this guy's like swerving around, like, or this guy. Because also too, something I've thought about is people are also taught not to care about things. People are taught heavily to not get involved and to not care, right? Because they're de-incentivized to do so. So like, think about it like this, right? If there's a fight that breaks down the street, or even at my school, which has happened, what are people incentivized to do? Well, if you get involved in the fight and you try to break it up, you get suspended too. Potentially, you could get suspended. Like, I asked a teacher about it. I'm like, what would happen if I were to try to break up a fight? They're like, well, yeah, but you get suspended. I'm like, why? Or you could. And they're like, well, if you were too rough with like trying to break up the fight, you could be suspended too. And I'm like, well, and I thought about that for a while, where it's like, or, a fight happens and it's like, you try to break it up. Well, it's like, what if the guy has a gun and then you get shot too? Which is like, I would never get, not on the streets, I wouldn't get involved, right? If it's like my friends, it's different. But when it comes to like a fight, for example, and like this happens, like you don't know if the guy's a gun and you don't want to be involved in that scenario. So what are people taught to do? Walk away, right? Maybe call the cops, and then that's it.
And
right.
To interject, like with society today, they're kind of incentivized to videotape it.
Yes. Well, actually, I will say this. Videotaping is not necessarily terrible, because sometimes it does show exactly how a situation went down.
Fair point.
Like there was the 8-Ball Jacket guy, I think was the guy's name. It was like this viral video years and years ago. But this woman, I think, was like slapping this guy in the face in a subway, and he responds back by like punching her in the face, right? And then he goes viral for doing that. I don't know the full scenario. It's like deeper than that. I know it, but the point is that he eventually got rid of the jacket because he didn't want to be remembered that way. And like, to be fair, like I 100% agree with that. Like, remove it if that's not what you want to be. But in court, when people were like, okay, well, you hit a woman, like this was like you punched this girl in the face. Well, then they showed the video and it's like, okay, you're good to go. It was self-defense.
Yeah.
So it is important, but I think the question is when. So it's like when somebody's like tape recording a fight, it's like, okay, no, you don't have to do that. Like one person maybe needs to videotape it.
And I'm kind of talking about the like kids now, like where it's like everyone's got a phone out. It's like, it's like, oh, can I get this on my story? Like that kind of like, because that
people are not very moral with the tape recording. I'm aware of that for sure. Yes.
Yeah. You're speaking about it in a.
I'm being very altruistic here. Yeah.
In a journalistic, like
documented. Yeah.
But you're not wrong. Like about, hey, even if they're doing it for the wrong reason, it could help. It could. Because that's, hey, in Philly, I don't know if you remember a couple months ago, maybe longer now, but like there was that like almost like riot-ish, like where kids broke into the Apple store and
I think I know
all these.
I don't know. I hear so many of those stories. It's kind of a shame, but
Yeah. But so much of it was videotaped.
yeah,
Because
but
these kids, again, they're live and they're like,
but nobody like in that group said, and this is I forget the term for what, because I take psychology.
Bystander effect.
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know the term. I should know. I take psychology. And I think I do know the term, but it's the idea that, again, conformity, that's a very powerful tool, right? When you see like a riot, for example, right? Like if I'm outside of the riot, what am I supposed to do? You can't fight off all these people. So in that case, yes, you should call the police and you should videotape it. But again, I'm talking from a very altruistic standpoint, which, like, if I'm going to be honest, most people do not have that intention. Most people are like, yeah, bro, look at how crazy this is. And I've done like, not similar, but, like I remember there was a protest in Ridgewood, like I recorded it. And I guess that's the same idea. But
What
like,
was the protest for?
this was like back when George Floyd died.
Mm-hmm.
But that was different. That was like a peaceful. It wasn't. In any case, though, nobody's sitting there in that group saying, "All right, we shouldn't do this," because if anybody in that group says that, then you're gonna be like, "What are you, an enemy?" Like there's so many people that have all these weapons. They're gonna beat you up.
I mean, people on social media. I remember when that was going on, and I didn't actually have social
Yeah.
media at that time, which was a great time to not have social media. But
for sure,
people, and there was even posts, even with the Israel Palestine kind of conflict. Like people will say, like, oh, if you're not posting, like, I see your true colors, you're not really in support of this.
No.
And it's like, oh, whoa, well, like, also, like, I try to stay away from any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
And you should.
I'm not informed about it.
right.
I'm not informed.
Precisely,
Like,
yeah.
Again, even with the topic that I think I'm most informed in, which is like mental health, I'm still not informed enough to like,
Make a decision.
really, like, that's what, again, like, hopefully by the time that I, am a little bit older and have thought through these things enough, like, then I'll have a plan, like an intentional, like you're saying, step-by-step plan of like, here's what we actually do.
Right.
Because even today, you just shared with me a brilliant point that I never would have had awareness of, but now I do. And now it's like, okay, then maybe some steps can actually be taken.
Right.
Versus, again, let's have all this, all these veterans meditating. It's like, whoa, well, like that actually might not be good.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about with bringing things up to the surface too quickly.
Yeah.
That's something that's debilitating for people to like, you need to step by step do these things. On a personal level, and on a societal level too, which is why I kind of like said like the drip drop campaigns of, getting people aware of these things. Cause I think we're in that age right now. It's like the awareness age, people are kind of, and again, people say like waking up or like, the Matrix, like all this, like, all these, again, like buzzwords, whatnot.
Nonsense. Kind of. Yes. Yeah. Well, like
there's truth behind it. I think there's truth behind a lot of it, but it's like,
let me ask you this. Sorry to interrupt, but same CIA guy that I keep on talking about, he made it's a good quote. What's 99% of the truth? Still a lie.
A lie. Yeah.
It's still a lie. 99% of a truth is still a lie. So when people say there is some truth to it, unfortunately, it's just not a true statement, right? So when people are saying, the Matrix is this, it's like, okay, who is the Matrix? We know so much more, but like we can't share it. It's like, well, do you really know?
Yeah.
Like,
Are you familiar with Alan Watts?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Same. He opened my brain up to a lot of different concepts and thoughts, and just listening to recordings of his talks, which again is beautiful. There's a really cool part of Alan Watts because like he was an alcoholic.
Yes.
And drunk a lot.
And he cheated on his wife multiple times.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's preaching this like certain kind of, lifestyle, but he actually in a way stayed true to that. Like when he talks about life being a game and it just should be play.
Right.
That's what he was doing. And even if it wasn't like morally, in the best way, he was still doing it.
Right.
But I like when he talks about essentially like life is like a constant game of hide and seek from yourself.
Right.
And I think that's beautiful. I think that there's like a very cool part of you're never going to get to know your entire self. I don't know if that's the goal. I actually wrote a poem about this. And there was a line in it. It was like, forgetting is the game. That's why we play for fun. Like,
right.
Because if everything was perfect, would this be fun? If like you could get anything and everything that you wanted right now, would you like press that button? I don't think I would.
Well, you have to define what you want. Again, that's a very big thing. It's like you have to define what like everything means to you, right? So like politics, for example, what does that mean to you? If you're somebody that really cares about being the one to make the difference, get into politics. But if you're somebody like, me who
do you think that's why people get into politics?
well, sometimes it's also self-benefit. But like I'm saying, again, very altruistic. It's if they're sitting there saying like, oh man, this is such an issue. Like I want to get into politics and change this. And some people do, right? Not unfortunately a lot of people, but there are definitely people that do that. Get into politics if that's what you want to do. But like to me, does it really make a difference if Donald Trump becomes president, or if Joe Biden becomes president, or if RFK Jr., or if like Vivek Ramaswamy? Not really, right? Like some things might change about my life, like for sure. But do I care about those changes? No. Like, so politics for me is like, I'll keep up with it. I'll discuss it a little bit, but I do not make it my personality and this thing that I'm obsessed with, and like this war is going on and I have to think about it. It's like, well, no. It's like everybody's making decisions that's going to like benefit their country or like their bottom line. So it's like, it doesn't mean anything to me to say I'm going to vote for this guy or that guy, because I don't think that they're really like these great stand-up people. Like, so for that, like as an example, I define that as like not a super valuable thing to me. But then you get something like, I don't know, like Xbox, for example, right? Like, what does that mean for me? It means downtime. It means like I get to just take my mind off things and play games with my cousin for a bit. And that's what it means to me. Like or like my friend, right? Or my friends or whatever. I get to hop on a party and play Rainbow Six Siege. And that's fun. But that's what it is to me. It's fun. It's not work. I'm not thinking about other things. I'm just having fun. Like same thing with and also too, I wanted to start off with this, but before I got almost having a car accident, there's the Chinese restaurant I was telling you about. What's it called?
The buffet.
Yes, the buffet. Yes, I want to take you, Julian, and Jim there one day. Like it's in Ramsey, so it's gonna be easier for Jim and Julian. But that like it's gonna be cool. Like for just 3 hours, it's gonna be like off the record, just us having dinner together. That would be really sick.
I love it. I'm down.
Yeah,
and I could eat Chinese buffet for a while.
So so if we're gonna sit there for 6 hours just together, like that is fine. But my point is with that, getting back to the point is, I was having a conversation with one of my other cousins. I have so many cousins. I have like over 30 of them. But he's a vegan, right? Hardcore vegan, right? Doesn't eat anything animal based, even on like special occasions. So I spoke to him and I'm like, look, when I eat healthy, I know what I'm eating is healthy and I'm not questioning it. And I'm going to go like super hard on it. Like I'm going to eat broccoli, spinach, and it's going to be like the most bland thing ever. But I don't care because I know what I'm getting out of it. I'm not sitting here questioning like I want to mix it with, this vegan product, which has a million seed oils in it, which are really unhealthy, and soy, which it's a whole nother topic of like raises your estrogen, which isn't good for men. And I don't want to get into that topic, but it's like, I'm not trying to make it like something I like, so I'll eat it. It's like, well, no, like I know what it is. And then you get Chinese food, which is the inverse of that, where it's like, I know it's unhealthy, but do I care? No, like, because I'm eating it to enjoy myself. So when I'm saying like define things, you have to know you, right? If you want to be happy, because everyone's always like, bro, I want to be so happy. Like there was this girl I was talking to, I actually asked her if she like wanted to ever like assist me on the podcast, like, cause she's super interested in mental health too. She said probably not, but like, but she was like super interested in what I was doing. And she's like, oh, this is like so amazing. But, I'm like, most people want happiness, but they don't like know what that really looks like. Most people love the idea of happiness and they love the feeling, but they don't know what it is for them. And what a lot of times people also do is they mix happiness with fulfillment. Those are two very different, but also overlapping things. Fulfillment, you can gain from something that might not always make you happy. Like, for example, does it make me happy when, I'm about to do a podcast and like, I'm waiting there for 30 minutes and then the guy texts me or doesn't text me at all and the guy completely ghosts me. Like, does that suck? Yes. But it gives me fulfillment to do it, to do the interviews, like when it does work, right? That's fun. But what isn't fun, but it's worth it though. It's worth the moments that aren't fun. So, yeah.
It's funny you when you said people want happiness. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There's also a lot of times where people don't.
Right.
And I think our society is built for, and again, not even complaining about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people want to be happy? Do people want control? I don't really think so. I don't think people want control.
What do you mean? What do you mean by control?
Again, if you could have everything, if you could wave a magic wand and have everything that you ever wanted, would you do it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't. If then what's the point? There without the struggle. And
Right.
hey, like there's different perspectives. This is me right now on this day having this perspective, which is gonna change in time,
right?
And it will develop. But like, people want to be upset. They do.
Yeah.
They want to feel the range of emotions, and they like getting upset. That's why people like watching shitty stuff on the news.
Yeah.
That's why people like watching nonsense TV. That's why people like playing video games, because they want to be distracted. They want to have these escapes, which is great.
Yeah. Well, there's something I finished what you're saying.
Yeah.
I was gonna say there's something I was talking to last year. I was in social studies and I had a substitute who. He was such a cool guy, and it's such a shame he doesn't teach at the school anymore. Like, but he was such an awesome guy. And he was not meant. He is not at all trained to teach an honors class. I'll say that he was, because the teacher got pregnant, but he was not at all trained to teach an honors class, and that was fine. I had an A the first 2 quarters, and as soon as she came back, I got a B. But the guy was so cool, and we would talk about the philosophy or whatever. But because he's used to teaching like kids in like bad areas that are so bad that, or not good, or whatever term you want to use, just so poor or poverty ridden that there'd be kids my age that don't know how to read. So he would read everything out to us because like the kids wouldn't know how to read, and the kid, whatever. So I was talking to him about something called recreational sadness that I termed, like I kind of made that term. I don't know. Somebody probably else has made that term, but I've never heard it before.
Yeah, same. I like it.
So recreational sadness or like recreational anger, like people want to be a little scared every once in a while. People like that thrill of like not knowing what's going to happen. People like that little, like, I don't know, people don't like to know exactly what's going to happen, but do they like the sense of control? Yes. That's why some people don't do drugs, for example. Like, I think it was Gary Vee. He was saying this. He's like, the reason he doesn't do drugs is because he doesn't like the feeling of not being in control. And if you've ever read The Great Gatsby, have you read The Great Gatsby? No, okay. Go figure.
Max's face.
But well, we just finished it up. But one of the points about Gatsby is his whole thing is control, right? And building this persona and making people like him. But one of the things that's interesting about him is that he serves all this alcohol to all these people, like, and this is like time of prohibition. It's like wood alcohol. It's like alcohol that will make you go blind if you drink it.
Yeah. I've seen the movie. So
yeah.
So
he's serving all this alcohol and stuff, but he never takes it. And the question is why? Well, what happens when you drink alcohol? You lose your inhibitions, you lose a level of stress, and you relax and you let your guard down. Therefore, you don't have control. People say crazy stuff they don't mean, or sometimes they do mean that they haven't revealed when they're drunk or when they're inebriated. So he doesn't do drugs because he doesn't like the lack of control. Other people love the lack of control, and they love how random and spontaneous they become, or the confidence that they gain when they're on drugs, as an example. So to your point about like happiness and control, I think that's also just a matter of preference. And again, defining what it is that you want or what you need. So like some people really like the feeling of getting drunk every weekend. Other people, it gives them such intense anxiety because they love that feeling of control. So the question becomes like, everything is about balance. Like, it's such a corny thing to say, but everything is really about balance. Like balancing what you know you want, what you know you don't want, what you think you want, what you need, whatever. Like, you have to know how to balance everything.
Yeah, and it's funny you say corny because it's the most true thing, ever. And we could do another episode on like I actually just wrote this paper about the way that the world has become unbalanced. Essentially, I think that's again the mental health crisis. And I still got to finish the paper's done. It's not as good as I want it to be, but it started out talking about men's mental health, and then the way that it got just through like the research was like, I think we're just out of touch and out of balance with all these things. We have these massive developments in technology, these massive developments. So if we're starting to speed in a technological area, we're going to start slowing down in other areas, which I think is this social stuff, this eye contact, people talking to each other, all these other things. Like, okay, if we're going to be more technologically advanced, which we are, we're then going to get out of touch with our physical bodies. Right. And we're going to, as I talked about, kind of like, and again, I got to expand on my own thoughts here, but it's why I think that these are different, like I call them different worlds. Right. Like this is a different, and people don't talk about it. And I got to give you that book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum. There's this physical world, there's a spiritual world, there's this creative world, there's these other, again, entities, whatever you want to call it, plant world, mineral world, like all these, different things. We don't talk about them in the way that we should, which like Instagram is a different world than TikTok. Very closely related, but there's slight differences. People are a little bit more authentic maybe on one of the platforms, people are a little bit more vulnerable on TikTok. I don't even have TikTok, but just from what I know. But Snapchat, LinkedIn, everybody's different on every single one of these platforms. And so we're essentially all, in my opinion, dealing with like split personality disorder. Right. That has nobody talks about it like that. Again, it's like,
but I've thought about that the exact thing that you're talking about a lot. But go on what you're saying though.
It's just, I think that's, again, what can we do? So like we were talking about in the break, like what can I really do? What can we do here to like talk about mental health and promote certain things, or like, instead of just talking about the basic stuff. Like I think it's something that everybody can resonate with, especially in the work world. Yeah. Especially in the work world. Because you can't say certain things in a corporate world. Right. You're not allowed to. Like we just had training, and I don't want to really talk about my full-time job much on the podcast, but like the DEI stuff, like I had to set a goal for like, what was my DEI goal for the quarter?
What does that mean? I don't even know what that means.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And there's like, and you know who doesn't know what it means either? The people that are telling us to do it. Right. Because again, in theory and in practice, okay. But what are we all doing? We're just checking off a box. What should my actual DEI goal be? What should everybody's be, I think? Yeah. Which again, I'm like a little brash here, but like fucking be a better person. Yeah. Treat people better. Have deeper conversations. Right. Treat people with 100%, respect. Yeah. Learn about others. Yes. Like what is me saying that I'm going to attend the LGBTQ plus IA meeting going to actually do? If I'm just going to sit there and like not actually be,
Well, you're going to walk out the same exact person as you did. 99% of people, and I'm not even just talking about this. I'm saying like with anything that anybody tells you, like whether it be school or work or whatever, no matter what mandatory meeting that is set for HR standards, you're going to be the same person. I can almost guarantee you. Like,
and sorry to jump in, because as you're saying it, it's like, again, back to your point about school, how do you get people to want to be interested in that? Right. Because if you don't have any desire to learn about that, and you're just forcing it on people, how do you make people, same with the veterans, how do you make them want to go seek out, like back to the veterans, if they lock up their guns and they're getting paid a certain amount of money every day that their gun's locked up, well then maybe they don't want to have that gun right now. Maybe they want to. How do you incentivize them to get the help?
Again, it's just trust. Like I think again, like you have to have presentation is a very big thing. Like, because most kids don't care because they have no reason to care, because they're, again, when the teacher is this young lady that's basically your age, that is closer to you and your age than she is to most of the other teachers, that's a problem. Like they don't have the respect, and I really don't blame them because they view you as a friend. And like when the person's like super talkative and super nice, like, and like they don't say anything when kids are like, doing other homework, they don't care. Like, kids,
sorry to jump in, but like thinking about the incentive structure, it's funny because actually some of my favorite teachers, I was very lucky my entire education career to have like amazing teachers. Very few that I even the ones that weren't so amazing, like I still think they helped in a lot of ways, me learn. But what's the incentive structure for the school? And a lot of it has to do with budgeting. How do you pay teachers less and get more? Well, you hire younger teachers.
Efficiency, yeah.
Yeah. So you might have a teacher who's 50, 60 years old, but you got to pay them a certain amount of money because they're again, back to like numbers, scales, stuff. All right. So say this person is a 10 out of 10 teacher and you have to pay them a 10 out of 10 salary. Well, if you can get a 5 out of 10 teacher for a 2 out of 10 salary, aren't you getting that spread right there? You're saving on that. So like, I understand why, and then again, back to the actual, this is another thing of like, all right, how can we actually figure out steps to like make a difference and impact? I like what you said about getting the right people into the rooms, like things like cops. Well, cops shouldn't be, and same thing with teachers.
Yeah.
I don't think that they should have this mental health thing on them.
Because it's not on, it shouldn't be.
It's not what a teacher, it's like you should have, I think, again, like you said about life management. Okay, well, if in school and if in curriculums, there's also like a spiritual side, an emotional side, or like these different levels of classes, like I hate to, and again, not smart enough to do much about it right now, but like the system, the education system was set up for people to listen to rules, to follow orders.
Yeah. Rockefeller.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, of course that's what we're good at. Like, it's like input, output. It's not hard. And that's the other thing is like, I think having these conversations is good because if you don't understand, then it is bothersome. But like, I get why they're doing these things. Yeah. Like as much as I complain sometimes about the like, kids having the LGBTQ whatever stuff. And I don't want to be dismissive because I support whatever anybody wants to do, but like, they're having it jammed down their throat at these early ages.
Right.
Like, I get it. I get why it's happening. I do. I think the message behind it, again, in theory is good.
It's good.
Be accepting of other people.
Right.
Don't judge people for like these things. Right. Do I think when you're like force feeding it down their throat that like, I saw a cartoon. Yeah. And I hate to say this, but it does like bother me because I just think let kids be kids. Yeah. Have these conversations when they're 20. Don't have these conversations when they're 5.
Well, one thing I will say is that if you do want to have the conversation with the child, because eventually that will come a day, and I've thought about this with my own kids. It's like, let's just say like my son sees let's just say 2 guys holding hands. And it's like, well, and he's like, okay, well, I thought only couples do that. And like, I say to him, I'm like, well, yeah, well, they're a couple too. He's going to be confused. I'm going to just tell him the very honest truth of just, well, there are some people that feel an attraction to people of the same sex. I don't think that, because again, everything that, like, when I say it to somebody, like when I say things, it's just be as honest, as simple, as truthful, and as direct as you can, because chances are then you're going to get exactly what you want, right? So you don't want your son to be sitting there, like, oh yeah, I'll tell you when you're older, because then they're gonna be like, well, what is that? What does that mean? Yeah. That's like one of the worst things you could tell a kid is like, well, we'll tell you when you're older, because then the kid's just gonna sit there and be all curious and be like, well, what does that mean? But what did he mean by that? Like, and they'll be thinking about it, and it's like, well, like it doesn't explain. They're gonna still be curious.
Yeah.
So if I was in that, you can explain it in much nicer terms. That's what I would do. And I would just say in much more simple terms, it's like, well, if my son is like, oh, I heard about like people that like boys that are attracted to boys, for example, I'm just going to say to him like, yeah, that is what happens. Like some people feel that way. And then that's it. Like, I don't think and if he asked more questions, I would answer them, but it's like, it's not a super complicated conversation, I don't think, for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
that's the other thing is like same thing. You have the ability to have that conversation even at 17 years old, you do. You know what I mean? But like a lot of parents don't have the ability to like talk through things with their like, another thing that brings me back down to reality. I had this conversation with my mom the other day is like, we forget, all of us, and honestly, a lot of people listening too, we're in the 1% of the world.
Right.
Like the
of
top
everything,
of everything everywhere. We're the top of the top, again, actually, maybe it's like that's what we're told, so we do feel that way. But like,
but we're the number one superpower in the world. That is a fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
will we be in 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah.
But right now we are. Yes.
And everything, financially, intellectually, all these different things. Like we're very, very fortunate. Not everybody has the ability to sort through those emotions like that, because I agree, there needs to be a fullness to the conversation. I think, again, because I said, like, I support that kind of stuff, but I wish that people had more real conversations about it, where it was, hey, this is how people feel, and it's okay that they feel that way. That doesn't mean that you have to like it. You can still feel like, allowing kids to say like, that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I actually had when I was a kid, this is kind of wild. I remember getting this transgender person was cutting hair.
Yeah.
And I was young. I was like 5 years old, 6 years old. I was bawling my eyes out. I was scared of the person.
Right.
Because that was my first. I'd never seen like a man that was dressed as a woman. That scared me.
Yeah. You felt uncomfortable.
Yeah. Period. So instead of saying to kids like, oh no, like everybody can, which they can, also saying, I would understand why that doesn't make sense to you right now. And it won't make sense to some people, because unless you felt that way, and again, there's other reasons. Like, I think that it's a topic that we've talked about a couple different times here, because it is fascinating to me. It is like, because I do believe that people, personally, yes, people who feel like a woman can be born into a man's body. Like, I think people can, but also at that young age, if you instill that idea in somebody, well, then they're more likely, like, again, this isn't like a bold prediction by any means.
Right.
Okay. People like kids didn't have access to that idea, so they didn't know it was possible. So now that they do have access at 5 years old, what's going to happen? More boys are going to dress like girls. More girls are going to want to be guys.
Yeah.
Because when we were younger, that wasn't
right.
Nobody was aware of any of that stuff. There was no, and like now, I don't think we had any, kids that were transitioning when I was in high school. Now, say there's in 100, out of 100 kids, 5 of them are like, so that's 5%. That's a massive increase, and that's only going to get bigger.
Right.
Which is, again, I think having like real conversations about, all right, this is happening. This is like a big societal thing.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? And it doesn't mean anything needs to be different, but I don't know. I get long-winded with it because I don't know the answers.
Well,
I just want everybody to be happy, and it sounds so lame, but like.
Well, I think for me, like, I mean, I've never been gay or questioning or trans, so I have no idea what it's like. So for me, I can't really like you would say, like, I can't really speak on that experience because I don't know what it's like. I've never felt that way. So, but when it comes to like relating to people and like trying to figure certain things out, I try to take scenarios that I've already been through and then say, okay, well, how is this kind of like this? Like why do I feel like why does this person feel this way? Like whatever. So it's like for example, I would be like, well, if, for example, you don't feel fulfilled in like one scenario, it's like maybe you'd feel more fulfilled if you presented yourself as a woman. Like that's how I would kind of relate it. So, but regardless of like the actual of like those scenarios, for example, I think in general, just how do you present it to people? Like, for example, okay, I don't know. For example, civil rights, right? Or LGBTQ rights or women's rights. It's like, well, you have to explain to people very matter of factly and very simply how things are. So if you want to say, for example, that, in 1950, or whenever women, or not 1950, like before, when women got the right to like not only vote, but like be able to divorce, right? Because for a long time, women couldn't divorce or vote or do anything. But it's like, you got to have the conversation of like, okay, well, women can vote too, right? Why do you think that? Because they're capable of making decisions. You have to make that apparent, like to someone who doesn't think that way. It's the same thing with any hate group, for example, like the KKK, which doesn't really exist anymore, but like right-wing groups or left-wing groups on either side. It's like they both hate each other and they're both surrounded by people with really extreme beliefs, which then kind of circles them both. And they don't have very simple, okay, well, look, the other side thinks this because it's not like they're saying like, okay, well, the other side thinks this because they're trying to be more compassionate, or the other side thinks this because they're trying to make a difference in this country, right? They're not seeing that. They're seeing that person is on a side I don't like. I'm not even going to listen to them. I hate them now. And because they're told by everybody around them, eventually that leads into like terrorist attacks, which is a really, really like another long topic. But the idea is group polarization. That's the name of that. It's like my teacher gave us a good example. Imagine the Young Democrats Club and the Young Republicans Club at school on different days, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what the days are, but you walk into one meeting and you're a Democrat, like a very, very minorly left leaning, you're going to walk out a much deeper Democrat. Same thing on the opposite side. Republican walks in like slightly Republican, like, oh, I kind of like these ideas. They're going to walk out much more on the right, right? Because they're like, wow, all these people validate my opinion and also hate the other side. And so therefore, the problem is when you're looking at people like they are not people, like they are an idea, right? Again, simplify things. So going back to the idea of, how do I tell a child about gay people, for example? And the answer is you should, right? Like, I think you should, but you have to present it as, yeah, like that's a thing that happens, right? And that's it. Like, because that's the truth. Like, that is a thing that happens. People do feel attracted to the people of the same sex. Same thing with, people being born of a different skin color. Why? Okay, well, because of this heritage, because of this history. Like, that's why. Like, there's really no, I don't know. I just feel like people overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
Like with this, it's like, oh, I don't know why this book is allowed in the school, and then this book, and then this thing. It's like, well, look, okay, like what is not allowed in a school? What is allowed? Yeah. All right. That's it.
And what's behind it too is like, it's because it's funny, like immediately 20 minutes later, I'm like already kind of like disagreeing with myself of the message behind it is that being different is okay.
Yes.
And that's a message I believe in.
Yes.
Deeply.
Heavily. Yes.
Deeply.
Same. Yeah.
And so if that's the vehicle that needs to be used to like make that the biggest imprint possible, maybe that's okay. And if that means that 10% of more kids are like, transitioning, then that is what it is. But also another thing, and I want to get off the topic in a minute because like you can only talk about it so much, but like transgender suicide rates are off the charts.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So if we're going to have this conversation, we'll have the conversation, both sides. Okay, I want to support people that do that, but knowing that, allowing my child to do this at 13 is giving them a this much percentage higher rate of suicide.
Yeah.
You can't avoid that, and it's like people want to, and it's not like, so it is what it is, and it's. Again, that's the thing. It's like the hard conversations where it's like, of course I want to support. If I have a child that like is confused, yes, I want to do whatever I can, but also with the analytical understanding that I'm not going to put them in a position that's going to give them a 50% higher suicide rate. I'm not. If you know what I mean, if they want to do that, like I think a lot of things. I think another thing is just in general, brains don't fully develop till like 25,
right?
And that's I think even going to start getting later and later with just technology.
Right.
So you have these kids, and even at 18, I'm 28. Like I still don't
understand.
I still consider myself like a child, like again, person in a lot of ways. But this is gonna be a random question to wrap things up. What was one of your favorite memories of childhood? First thing that comes to your mind of like
playing chess with my grandpa.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a good one. My grandpa was a chess grandmaster, and he was also an Olympic fencer. But he was awesome at playing chess, and he loved playing chess with me. And that's like, I just love my grandpa as a kid. I used to watch Tom and Jerry with him all the time. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. Wow, what a cool answer. I don't know if I've asked anybody that, but might have to start bringing it in. But well, George, thank you for this entire conversation, for coming here.
Absolutely,
thank you to your parents for coming through. It was so nice to meet them. And
thank you.
I guess what would be some parting advice that you'd have? Because like people always ask older people, of like, oh, well, like what advice would you give to kids? Like, what at your age? You know what I mean? Yeah. What advice would you give to older people?
Your primary focus in life should be being a good person above all else. And I thought about this where in descending order of like, you know, I'm not descending order, but it's like what's most important, right? Like just being a good person is probably the most important thing. Like defining what it means to be like a good person and like what you need and what you like to do in life is extremely important. And like the number one advice I would give anybody is just be a good person. Just be truthful. And I was on the phone with somebody. It's like, and I said to him, look, if people were good, honest, and truthful as much as they could be, and they tried to avoid lying as much as possible, and they tried just doing the good thing when they knew to do it, 90% of the problems in the world would not exist.
I like it. It's funny. It made me think about life being balanced. What's good without evil, you know? Right. And that's what I think an unfortunate, tough conversation to have is like, as much as I want everything to be good. And that's also, you know, expanded thoughts. We'll probably keep talking after we cut these cameras off, but like, the more good in the world that's starting to happen, the more evil in the world there will be. And I think that we're getting to that point where there's becoming more of a spread between the two. But I think that you're spot on with, again, why not? That's my theory too. Why not try to be a good person? Why not try to do the right thing? It's like, I don't know, it's way easier to sleep at night.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
But dude, thank you so much, Max.
No problem. It was awesome.
You.
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody
Had a lot of fun.
Who's listening. I fascinated by this conversation, and I think others will be too.
Thank you.
So
it was great talking to you. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have a good one.
We're going to do it again. For sure.